So now let's look at the questions of modern history. Two questions appeared. They were from expected topics, which means that anyone who would study modern history would go through these topics, right? The Macaulay's Minute, when you study about the role of education, you study about Macaulay. When you read the Charter Act 1833, you read about Macaulay when we talk about the deindustrialization of India, or how the wealth was drained from India. So at various junctures, we talk about Macaulay. Now, specifically why Macaulay was asked this year, if we can only reverse engineer, right? There is no set parameter that this is why UPSC has asked a question. But recently, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita BNS code was implemented towards the end of 2024. Macaulay is also in news because of the national education policy. So the impact on education, it appears in the newspapers, Macaulay's name. And Macaulay is a permanent flashpoint in modern history, because you would also have used the term Macaulay Putra. So anyone, if they are trying to be too elitist, then you call them Macaulay Putra. Now, if we turn to the question, discuss the impact. So first of all, when we look at the word discuss, I have mentioned it again and again that you have to not only address the core theme of the question, but there must be some counter points also. They may be 1 point or 2 points, but discuss means you have to bring a judgment in the end, which means mentioning some limitations, right? So we will see what is that theme here. Impact of Macaulay's Minute on colonial administration and education in India. So the students I have spoken to, and as I had feared when I saw this question, though it is not difficult, that most of you will focus on education part only, right? Naturally, you would find more points related to education on related to the impact of Macaulay's Minute, but you had to talk about the administration also, the impact on administration. Okay, so maybe 40 to 50% here of your body, and 40 to 50% here. So that is one error that you could have made, or two errors, should I say, that not bringing in that limitation or that third angle into your answer, and focusing just on the education and ignoring the administration part because it seems easier, and then we have the pressure of the exam. Now, if we look at how we would answer this question, the introduction of this should always, in modern history, please maintain static introductions, right? Static introductions which talks about who Lord Macaulay was, right? Because his identity is important here. What was the Macaulay's Minute, and any important information. So always, as we say, mention the names, mention the dates, mention the events. Those should be seen in your answer. Now, then we focus on the part after introduction. You focus on the part of administration, the various impacts on administration, which would be about, if we focus on the body, or if overall the answer, this would be about 40% of your answer. And in education, again, this would be the 40% of your answer. Then the theme that we should have introduced there to give a comprehensiveness to our answer. So that would be the unintended consequences of Macaulay's policy, that he did not end, but we saw them unfolding. So basically, this would be the political impact, or from the British point of view, the political fallout of Macaulay's policy. And finally, we would conclude it. right? Which would be, in a sense, a continuation of our theme that we have introduced. Okay. Now, if we look at the answer, how would the ideal way to introduce it? This is where you show your prelims knowledge, right? So introduction, as I have told you, it should be based on the static information that you generally study for your prelims. So Lord Macaulay was the law member of Governor General's Council who submitted the minute on Indian education. So you are making it clear that this minute was to do with the English education overall, though it will have administrative impacts also. If you remember the date, it's good. Otherwise, you should definitely know the year, 1835. Settling the Angelicist Orientalist controversy in favor of Angelicist, and here you could have mentioned in bracket in favor of English. And it was passed by the Governor General. His recommendations were passed as an act by William Bentinck, the Governor General, as the English Education Act 1835 to give effect to this, right? That is all. One sentence or two sentences maximum, which would take about 10%, not more than about 10% of your word limit. So 10% for your introduction, 10% for your conclusion, right? Somewhere here you have 80% of your answer. Now, moving forward, the impact on administration. See, English replaced Persian as the official language. So Persian had been continuing for about 300 years, 400 years, some can say even 500 years in India. Now, what does this? What this does is that it transforms the recruitment base, right? Transforms the base of recruitment into the government, and hence it has long lasting impact on the administration in the country. Okay. This is to the detriment of Indians, because Indians were educated in Persian, most of them, and now they have to reorient towards, so it preferred those people who were already oriented towards English. It also created a cheap intermediary class, or a class of interpreters, as Lord Macaulay has called it. That is, now they had Indian clerks. What we call this? The Indian clerks on Indian salaries, right? Which this we call as empire on the cheap, right? Overall, whether the company or the British Crown, this is again under the empire on the cheap. This leads to, for the British, administrative economy. So everything is being done in an economical way to bear the least cost to the British. Okay. The codification of the laws, which leads to uniform territorial law. So we know that earlier Maharaja Ranjit Singh would have his own law, Nawab of Bengal would have his own set of laws, so on and so forth. But for the British, for the first time, because of the politico-administrative unification, he was in 1833, we know he was appointed as the first law commission was appointed. So he was the commissioner of the first law commission, or the chairman of the first law commission, and he came up with the IPC in 1837, though it will be implemented, the IPC 1837, but it will be implemented in 1860. Okay. So what does codification of the law and the Macaulay's minute, how we can express it? That now it was the English educated judges or judiciary implementing the English law. Please make sure that your points are brief, otherwise you will not be able to include a lot of points. They have a lot of keywords. Okay. A continuity in the statement, in the grammar is not needed, but the continuity in the idea is required. So idea and implication, that is how your points will go. Then administrative unification, what does it do? It culturally cemented the bureaucracy. So this bureaucracy, which was coming from a shared language, a bureaucracy that was coming from a shared curriculum, if we can say, this ensured that there is homogeneity in the governance structure in the entire country, in India, in fact, in the entire empire. So now when different provinces have to communicate with each other, or there has to be communication between India and England, it is more cohesive, it is more free flowing, and not just between Britain and India, but in the entire British Empire. Okay, so these points, these are the major points that you should not have missed while addressing the demand on impact of administration, or sorry, impact of Macaulay's Minute on the administration, that all this is to the detriment of the Indians. Okay. Now, impact on education. So you would definitely, as I said, you would definitely have more points on the impact of education, because essentially the Macaulay's Minute is for spreading or introducing the English education to the Indians. So what does it do? The impact on education. Bentinck's English Education Act 1835, what does it make? It makes English as the medium of instruction. Okay, it makes it the medium of learning, especially in the higher education. Okay. Then we all know about the downward filtration theory. What does it do? It excludes the masses. It deprives the masses of literacy. So what they are doing? They're introducing English education, but not making it available to the Indians. And this will be more detrimental when we see the further points. So it excluded the masses from it. That is why an independent India had only 16% literacy rate, right? So it left the masses educationally deprived. Okay. It also clearly, during the Macaulay's Minute, a recurring theme is the contempt for the vernacular education and the institutions, Indian educational institutions, when he says that, not very famously, that when we compare a single shelf of a good English library with the entire literature of the Orient, that is Asia and Africa, then the shelf of English library is superior. It is worth more. So what are they doing? He immediately says that we should stop publishing books in Sanskrit, in Arabic, or in Persian. He wants to end or shut down the institutions like Sanskrit College, the Calcutta Madrasa, while granting more money to Hindu college. We have seen it in 1817. So indigenous learning and the contempt for vernacular education, it ultimately shuts down many pathshalas, many tols, many madrasas, many gurukuls. And what does it do? Ultimately, it leads to, when Indians are learning completely deprived of their indigenous educational institutes, it leads to the cultural alienation. They are completely cut off from their roots. Okay. Then, see, though Macaulay says that we should deliver scientific education, but what they really deliver is literary education and legal education. This ensured that India, when it gained its independence, it lacked the engineers, it lacked the scientific base. No educational institute of No, very few were established. Like we have the Rudki College, right? Very few institutes were established for technical education, but mostly they were for these literary and legal education. So depriving in scientific base and thus an industrial base to the country. Okay. Further, it established the English educated. That is what it recommends, that we should establish English teaching schools in the major towns, that is in the presidencies, which we will later see through the Magna Carta of English education in India, that is Charles Wood's dispatch, that after the Wood's dispatch, we see this in the form of universities that were established in 1857. So university in Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. This is another impact on education of the of Macaulay's Minute, long-term impact. Now, these 2 points, if you would have missed on any of the above, and if you could have written these 2 points, then it would fetch you much more marks. Like if you go through the text of the Macaulay's Minute, or if you have studied about it, you will know that it completely bestows the function of education into the Governor General's Executive Council. That Governor General and his council will be solely responsible for deciding on education. So once, which was a decentralized system in India, has been now completely centralized. Okay. Further, it made education an instrument of political security. Okay, because now the syllabus itself has become a tool of governance. So if you grow up studying James Mill and his narrative about the inferior Indian civilization with all its shortcomings and depravities, according to James Mill, then you would obviously be oriented to be a supporter of the British rule, right? So this would also be an impact, a direct impact of the Macaulay's Minute. Now, what were the unintended consequences that Macaulay did not intend, but it happened, right? That is, we know that whenever we talk about rise of nationalism, socio-religious reform movements, always Western education is a major point there. Okay, so when we talk about the unintended consequences, and you didn't have to mention or expand on these points, this could have been just a single sentence listing all these things, because they are quite self-explanatory and they are not part of the core theme of your answer. Okay, so the interpreters became the nationalist class. So the middle class that were born out of the ferment of this Western education, they were the people who will become the main plank of nationalism and Indian national movement. Okay, then it became a link language in the country, or it provided the linguistic coherence. Before English in India, the linguistic lack of a link language or lack of linguistic coherence was the major barrier for development of nationalism. English breaks down that barrier. So when leaders from different parts of the country, they meet at the Congress sessions, now they can communicate in a common language. Okay. The economic critique, you just have to write economic critique, no need to explain, but we know that because Dadabhai Nauroji was educated in English, he could go in through the documents and come up with a drain of wealth theory. Okay, whether it is Dadabhai Nauroji, whether it is R.C. Dutt, any of them. The social reform, right? From Western education, we learn rationality, humanism, utilitarianism, religious universalism. All that makes us question the outside authority, and now we give primacy to the individual conscience or the individual. Okay. It made universities the hotbeds, the very universities which were an outcome of Macaulay's Minute and then Charles Wood's dispatch. They would become the center of seditious activity against the British and nationalism. You would know that British had to later pass the Indian Universities Act, right, by during the tenure of Lord Curzon 1904 to control the nationalist activities in Calcutta University specifically, but universities across the country in general. Then it provoked the counter institutions, right? The nationalist institutions, especially, we see them during the Swadeshi boycott movement. Like initially, we had the Dawn Society in 1902. Then during Swadeshi movement, we have National Council of Education, Bengal Technical Institute, National College, later Jamia Millia Islamia, Bihar Vidyapeeth, Gujarat Vidyapeeth, so on and so forth. Okay. But you don't have to explain these, just mention these under the unintended consequences in a single sentence. Okay. How would we conclude it? We concluded that on the lines that this Macaulay's Minute was intended to develop, to make Indians as interpreters. You know, he said interpreters between the rulers and the ruled, between us and the millions that we govern. But they became interlocutors for independence, right? They led the Indian independence movement, the same people who were born out of this English education, right? Again, the challenge should have been in this answer for most of the people, the part on administration. Otherwise, it is quite an expected answer. Basically, conclusion is that how Macaulay's Minute leads to rise of national consciousness through the Western ideas. You know, we say that India broke her British fetters with Western hammers, right? So that one of the hammer was English education. Okay. Next. The significance of the Gandhian movements lay in the masses they mobilized, elucidate. Okay. Now, when they say elucidate, first of all, it means to explain and illustrate, right? Illustration part is quite important. However, it does not mean that you make it a series of names, right? Or just focus on the sections that were mobilized. Okay. This question is very similar to a question that had been asked, I believe in 2000, it was in 2019, a similar question had been asked that many voices had strengthened the Indian national movement during the Gandhian phase, strengthened and enriched the national movement during the Gandhian phase. This says elucidate, that question said elaborate. So very similar question and it would have a very similar answer. Why this question is asked? It is a perennial theme. Gandhi is always there. Okay. Now, the mistake you could have made in this, is just mention the sections that Gandhiji had mobilized or just Gandhiji's contribution in mobilization. That would be just part of the answer. The real answer is combining both the aspects. Okay. So, your introduction. Again, it would be static. It should have some dates. It should have some events. It should talk about overall. It should talk about overall impact, right? Not, you don't have to give away the answer, but allude that where your answer will be going with some static facts mentioned, which is relevant and which assures the examiner that what you're going to write is factually sound. So, introduction. Then, in body of the answer, I will have three parts. Okay. One is obviously how Gandhiji mobilized. That is, why people heard him, why people followed him, why people followed Gandhiji? The second part is the core of your answer. That is the various sections that were mobilized by Gandhiji and how we have to write that each point we will see. And ultimately, some uneven participation, that Gandhiji was not able to mobilize everyone. There were some sections who were left out of the Gandhian movements. Okay, Gandhian movements. Remember, the word is Gandhian movements. Okay, and obviously, when we conclude Gandhiji, we can conclude him on any point in the future. You can talk about his role in independence. You can talk about his role even in the present context. You can talk about his role in his ideology in the constitution, because it is about the democratic nature of Gandhian politics. That is why he is able to bring in so many people into so many sections into the Indian national movement. Okay. Now, if we look at the introduction, Gandhiji arrived in India on 9th January 1915 and transformed the Indian national movement from an elite-based movement to a mass movement. You can give an example to just quantify what you have said, that Gandhiji launched, or NCM under Gandhiji was the first national level mass movement. That is our introduction. Easy to write in the exam. You don't need to, be very philosophical, use a flowery language, be factually correct and to the point. It is a 10-mark question in GS. Now, this part many of you have missed. The significance of Gandhiji in mass mobilization, at least 2 points or 3 points should have been mentioned here. Okay. Under him, Congress became an umbrella organization. See, the membership of Congress under Gandhiji, it increased from few thousands in 1920s to millions in 1930s. It is under him that we see at the turn of the Quit India movement or the civil disobedience movement that tens of thousands of people, they quote arrest, they go to jail. His method of satyagraha, in bracket, whenever you write satyagraha, make it a habit to mention truth and non-violence. His method of satyagraha, that is truth and non-violence, neither required the arms, neither required the literacy, and nor did it require, if you want to mention, the wealth. So it was appropriate for everyone. It was available for everyone. Okay. Then his religious idiom and home compatible activism. Gandhiji, what does he say? The way to participate in the Indian national movement and what kind of state he wants. He talks about Ram Rajya. He talks about tapasya. He talks about moksha. He talks about karma yoga. Right? All these appealed to the Indian mind because it was dipped in Indian religious idiom, as well as home compatible activism, which means, how is he asking what is the biggest contribution anyone can make to the cause of Swaraj? For Gandhiji, it is charkha. Sit at your home and spin charkha. If you will not buy the British cloth, British will have no reason to control this country, right? So charkha and khadi, right? Then he linked local grievances to the national issues. When Gandhiji goes to break the salt law, he says this is a fight of right versus might. He considered the Indian national movement not just a political movement, but an ideological movement. But you don't need to get into that. These are, again, self-explanatory, but seeing the demand of the question, some explanation could have been provided for few points. Okay. Then his conciliatory approach. Before Gandhiji arrived on the scene, there was fracture in the Indian National Congress in 1907 between the moderates and the extremists. Gandhiji, for instance, in 1923, he avoided the division in the Congress between the Swarajists and the non-Swarajists. So it is under him, reconnected here, that Congress became an umbrella organization. The participation of the people increased. Now, the next point, the core of the answer, you have to mention various sections that were mobilized by Gandhiji. How he mobilized them, what he said about them, how he participated, and some example. So various sections that were mobilized by Gandhiji, again, we know very simply that it was the Muslims, the women, the peasants, the capitalist, then tribals, the frontiers of the country, then the youth, to just name a few. Now, your answer cannot be just this. So, Muslims, Gandhiji led the Khilafat movement. Or you can write opportunity, an opportunity that would not present itself in 1,000 years. Or it would be easier to write Gandhiji led the Khilafat movement. Example, you can write the name of B. Aman or Ali brothers, okay, or Maulana Azad, he joined the Indian National Congress. Women, Gandhiji says that to make the Indian national movement truly participated, an abla will have to be transformed into sabla. Example, Sarojini Naidu at the Salt March. Then similarly, the peasants, Gandhiji, when he delivers his first speech at BHU, he says, salvation of India will come from its peasants, not from its doctors or from journalists or from the lawyers. We all know the example, Champaran. Okay, always mention year wherever possible. 1917. It is an answer of history. Dates should be littered, sprinkled across your answer. Then capitalist who had stayed away, or there was limited participation during the NCM, or you can come to CDM, that CDM was the high point of the participation of the capitalist. Formation of FICCI, Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce, in 1927 by Purushottam Das Thakur Das and G.D. Birla. Then tribals, mention that Gandhiji asked Vernier Elvin and Amritlal Thakkar to work among the tribals, and you can mention either Rani Gaidinliu during CDM 1930, or you can mention Alluri Sitarama Raju in 1922. Frontiers, the red shirts that Gandhiji had appeal in even or united even the far-flung frontiers of the country. And example, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, right? Brief points. Then the youth, that Gandhiji was seen as a youth icon. He appealed to the youth as he overcame the frustration of the youth with the moderates, right? So, you can give example of Bose, you can give example of Nehru, right? Now, we talk about, so these are some of the sections that were led by Gandhiji. Obviously, I have forgotten a very important one, the untouchables. You can all write a point on it. Pune Pact, Harijan Sevak Sangh. So, those points could have mentioned. Some more points if you want. You could have mentioned the socialist like Jayaprakash Narayan. You could have mentioned even the foreigners, that Gandhiji's moral appeal or Gandhiji's morality, even moral methods, even appealed to the international audience. So you could have mentioned Madeline Slade, that is Meera Behan, Charles Freer Andrews, W. Pearson, Herman Kallenbach, so on and so forth. Any one name, not so many names, any one name. One example is sufficient for each point. Idea, where Gandhiji has spoken about them, how he wanted to integrate them, and an example. Next, the mobilization. So as Ranjit Guha says, that mobilization in Gandhiji's movements, it was a convergence, that different people were autonomously participating and they converged at one point. So it is not Gandhiji who is bringing this participation. So it is not purely a creation of Gandhiji. But even if you don't want to be so harsh on Gandhiji, then you could have mentioned uneven participation, like his failure to integrate the revolutionaries. You can write, I know that during the NCM some of them participated, but overall the revolutionaries stayed away. The communist stayed away. The limited appeal among the Muslims. The distrust among some sections of depressed classes. Don't just bluntly write depressed classes. You have to qualify it. For instance, Ambedkar does not believe Gandhiji, because UPSC has earlier asked a question, how far Gandhiji was trusted by depressed classes. So mention Ambedkar has not trusted, but we know that people like MC Raja, they trusted Gandhiji. Okay. Then INA, alienated Bose led to INA. Okay. Okay. So this is the point that you would have missed. Okay. Just like in earlier questions, unintended consequences, here the uneven participation had to be brought to make it comprehensive. Okay. Further and finally, the conclusion would be about the independence that was a result of Gandhiji's, right? That he has accelerated Gandhiji's participation, accelerated the Indian independence by bringing the various sections into the society, into the national movement, making it truly national. And in the present day context, you can talk about that how Gandhiji's moral ideas have led to the establishment of a more just, more equal, and more inclusive India. Something like this, right? So that would have, without any flowery language, you could have, with your existing knowledge, answered this question. So a guideline for us in the future is that don't go, before you start exploring some resources that no one is studying and following, foreign universities lectures, be thorough with your classes, be thorough with your class notes, and write about what you know from different perspectives.
In this segment, we are going to talk about mains examination, GS paper 1, especially with regard to the questions that have been asked from PIC and Indian art and culture. We are not going to talk about content that an aspirant should have written with regard to the questions from PIC and Indian art and culture. We are not going to talk about the important points with regard to content, or for that matter, the structure that an aspirant should have followed. But rather, we are going to talk about something deeper. What were the sources for these questions? Do we see any trend? Or for that matter, is it a certain kind of a departure that UPSC has taken with respect to questions from these two very, very important subjects in GS1? Let us see the kind of examination, the kind of questions that have been there, and we will try to figure out not only what are the key takeaways from these questions, but also an important aspect about what should be the strategy for the upcoming, for the next mains, maybe for some of us who have still not made their debut in the examination? Or for that matter, what is it that the nature of the questions that one sees in this particular segment? Let us see. So clearly, speaking about post-independence consolidation and reorganization within the country, yes, a very, very important part from GS1, very categorically mentioned in the syllabus, yes, as it is, and very limited number of themes that one has to prepare. The themes that one can really go about is, integration of princely states, or for that matter, the reorganization of states in post-independence consolidation, or for that matter, agriculture, identity, economy, and foreign policy. Yes, these have been the recurring topics. These have been the recurring themes. Let us see a certain trend that one sees with regard to this particular subject. Yes, integration of princely states, state reorganization, agriculture and land reforms, and identity related issues. That is also very much in sync with Indian society. Economic and foreign policy and overall consolidation. This is precisely how one sees with regard to these are some very, very important themes that one sees in PIC. Recurring over and over again, yes, year after year from these limited number of themes. So clearly, if one sees that yes, an overarching view is that UPSC has not made any significant change from the kind of themes that it has been asking questions. But is it everything? Is it the end of story? Definitely not. Why do we say that? Because clearly this year's mains examination is different because PIC has certainly been a game changer. It is not just one 10-marker question that UPSC keeps on asking in GS1 from PIC every year. Sometimes it has also been the case that what has happened here, that there has been absolutely no question from PIC. But this time we have had 2 questions from PIC. And that too not just 10 markers, but rather both the questions have been 15 markers, 15 marker each. Very, very significant for us to understand here. Now, this subject cannot really be taken lightly anymore. Certainly, a very, very important input can also be given into the essay module as well with regard to, the kind of content that one studies from PIC. So, certainly very, very important. 30 marks have been granted to the questions from PIC. Otherwise, if you look at it, so clearly one question every year, year after year. Year 2024, we did not have even a single question from PIC. But this year, we have had 2 questions. The first question is, linguistic reorganization of Indian states was driven by popular pressure from below. Comment. A very good question, a very comprehensive question, which certainly requires a very comprehensive approach. But is this the very new kind of a theme? Certainly not. Why do we say that? Because clearly, if you look at it, so clearly there have been questions from this particular theme even before. This question looks very, very familiar to us. Why? Because in the year 2018, exactly if you look at it, a similar question was asked. Discuss whether the formation of new states in recent times is beneficial or not for the economy of India. In 2016, certainly there is a much more similarity that one sees in the question. Has the formation of linguistic states strengthened the cause of Indian unity? Very, very important. But at the same time, if you look at it, so yes, this time certainly there is an element of popular pressure as well that has been there. So yes, an introduction has to be given with regard to this question, but time and again, as I used to tell the students that yes, the introduction has to be very, very comprehensive. What kind of an introduction can really one write over here is the linguistic reorganization of Indian states, beginning with the formation of Andhra state in 1953, represented both Indian unity and regional aspirations driven by popular pressure. Why do we say that? Because clearly so that the examiner knows that we are constantly talking about something that was also asked in the question. Popular pressure, yes. Linguistic reorganization of states, yes. Very important. More importantly, if you look at it, so we have also incorporated clearly an important chunk of information here, which is the creation of Andhra state in the year 1953. Not only that, we have also been able to incorporate the impact, the overarching impact of the process. For example, it has had impact on Indian unity and regional aspirations. It has represented both of these domains very, very specifically. So clearly, it is very important for us to understand here that an introduction has to be very, very comprehensive in nature. But at the same time, if you look at it, so it is also very important, it is also very significant for us to understand here that yes, a certain graphic could also have been made, here. For example, you could have drawn a map of India discussing discussing several linguistic state reorganization related issues. Yes. At the same time, if you are one of those candidates who could not really draw the map of India in the examination pressure, you could have also incorporated a chronological chart here. Like I always used to tell my students that yes, it is important to show the evolution, an overarching evolution of a certain process. The Andhra state, yes, Gujarat and Maharashtra, rise in regional demands. Yes. A very, very simple graphic, but certainly a very comprehensive one. Next in line is linguistic reorganization of states. Yes. So over here, you are supposed to kind of ensure that you are discussing several episodes with regard to the linguistic reorganization. Very important. The Andhra movement from 1972, Samyukt Maharashtra movement, Punjabi Suba movement and Dravidian movement with regard to linguistic issues. But at the same time, if you look at it, so it is very important for you to understand here that this could have just been the first part of the question. You were also supposed to write the second part with regard to the role of popular pressure from below, the role of popular movements from below. So clearly, if you look at it, so yes, Sri Poti Sri Ramulu's deaths, yes. Also, if you look at it, issue of Madras, the city of Madras, yes, in the Andhra movement. And then if you look at it, the issue of Bombay. So clearly, when Gujarat and Maharashtra, they were fighting for a certain linguistic identity, it was again the issue of the Bombay city that became a major, major bone of contention. Also, if you look at it, so you could have also incorporated Fazl Ali Commission's observations that one language, one state could not be the criteria. So clearly, this is precisely how you could have drawn an overarching picture here. But at the same time, if you look at it, so clearly it is very important that yes, comment. This is the key directive here. This is the key directive here. So you should have ensured that you are addressing a very comprehensive, there are 3 pages that were to be filled. Also, if you look at it, so 250 words. So 15 marker means, at least 13 to 15 points could have easily been incorporated in a question like this, and especially when the question directly comes from the very foundation that was laid by the PYQs. So it is very important that yes, you could have ensured that, critical appraisal of demand for linguistic states. Because if you were one of those candidates who would be writing positives and negatives, it would be a little too long. Because the question was itself asking you to divide the entire part of the body of the answer in 2 parts. Entire body of the answer in 2 parts. So it is very important that you should have ensured that you were kind of talking about it in a comprehensive manner, writing a critical appraisal for the demand for demand for linguistic states. Cultural accommodation within federalism. Diffused secessionist tendencies, like we saw in case of Sri Lanka, like we saw in case of initially Eastern Pakistan, yes, eventually what came to be known as Bangladesh. But having said that, it has also led to the rise of regionalism. Yes. Also, if you look at it, so clearly it is very important, yes, interstate disputes. So clearly, if you look at it, so one had to ensure that proper division, proper segments were to be made with regard to the entire body of the question, body of the answer. And it is only then that one kind of writes a certain conclusion. To comment further, the popular pressure of linguistics for linguistic states depicts a perpetual task to balance cultural autonomy with national integration. So what is it? It is again, why did we write comment further? Because clearly it is very, very important that yes, the question categorically asked us that we need to provide a certain ideological input. Can it really be radical? No. It has to look like an input of an aspiring bureaucrat. So clearly one has to give a very, very balanced and a very well-framed comment here. So this is one of the major reasons that a certain conclusion like this could have been there. Some of the students may have written a way forward. Yes, for PIC related questions, way forwards could also be, considered. Yes, but they can be a little tricky. So you have to ensure that you are incorporating a concluding comment as well to an answer like this where it was asked. So PYQs, again, we cannot really discard the very importance of PYQs. When everybody has been telling you that the paper was tough, paper was tricky, no, you should have still gone back to the PYQs. When everybody tells that yes, the paper has been easy, again, not necessarily. Because if you have not really prepared notes on the basis of PYQs, it becomes very, very challenging to write such answers in the examination pressure. Next in line is the model of planned economy was adopted in India to address the regional imbalances left behind by colonial rule comment. The model of planned economy, certainly if you look at it, so it is very important for us to understand here. Can we really say that this is the first time when a question has been asked on these lines? Not necessarily, because clearly just last year they did ask about economy. However little the section was, but it was certainly a very, very important demand of one of the questions from PIC. Trace India's consolidation process during the early phase of independence in terms of polity, economy, education and international relations. In 2014, again a very, very similar question was asked, which lays a very strong foundation for a question like this, which is 1921, the new economic policy 1921 of Lenin had influenced the policies adopted by India soon after the independence. Evaluate. Very important, yes. So clearly we are to talk about planned economy, yes. We are to talk about the mixed model, yes. But how it has kind of, addressed the regional imbalances that have been the legacy of the colonial rule, but also what are the limitations of a planned economy, the trajectory of which we have had in a very, very specific manner in the post-independence consolidation. So we could have written a very simple introduction here in post-independence India. Why? Because clearly it is important that we need to introduce the very subject to the examiner. In post-independence India, if you write, these are the first 4 words that you have, the examiner automatically gets introduced to the subject. Planned economy built on the mixed model attempted to depict a balance of regional growth and inclusive development. I did not want to kind of make it too long because clearly I can totally imagine that yes, the pressure of examination that one goes through, it is so much, it is so overwhelming that one cannot really write a lot in the introduction itself. However, there is still a very, very important chunk of information that one could really incorporate here, which is the mixed model that was incorporated initially in the post-independence consolidation. Now, can we really, an average aspirant would have done what? Would have not made any graphic, but no. If you would have wanted, if you would have trained yourself in the skill of making diagrams for history questions, you could have still been able to make it. What is it? So clearly you could have drawn a certain kind of an evolution. State-led industrialization till 65, From 65 to 70, poverty removal and agricultural focus, yes. But from 77 onward up till 91, yes, beginning of liberalization. But from 1991 onward, a specific focus has been given on liberalization within planning. Yes. So you could have drawn a certain trajectory with regard to planning, economic planning in India. Very important, it could have easily fetched you 5.5 marks at least. Then if you look at it, I'm not going to talk about, the content that one could really write here. There is so much of an overwhelming content that is already, that has been pouring in now. But rather, we are going to talk about what could have been done, where one could really fetch a few more marks here. Or for that matter, what could be the strategy or planning that one could have had in order to ensure that, there could have been a better possibility in terms of marking scheme. Colonial legacy of regional imbalances, yes. Not so many points, but rather only 2 to 3 points could have been enough. Industrial concentration, uneven infrastructure, for example, in the presidencies of Bombay, Madras and Bengal. Yes, very important. And the telegraph services, railway services, they were also to boost. The colonial economy, yes, or for that matter, the military related aspects that the colonial system was able to build. But after that, immediately after those 2 points, you should have come here, role of planning in addressing regional imbalances. So you could have incorporated the case studies of Rourkela, or for that matter Bhilai, or for that matter Durgapur, yes. But at the same time, you could have also kind of, spoken about the role of agriculture here. You could have spoken about freight, equalization policy, yes, or for that matter, the investment in infrastructure, yes. At the same time, if you look at it, so yes, limitations could have been spoken about. For example, the regional disparities, very, very important. Regional disparities, yes. But at the same time, if you look at it, so the aspects related to green revolution, again, you could have spoken something about that. So clearly, it becomes very, very important for us to understand here that yes, these aspects were to be incorporated in order to give an overarching, conclusive view, comprehensive outlook to the answer. The conclusion, if you look at it, so yes, planning as an instrument for correcting inequalities of the colonial period, better governance, better infrastructure and region-specific strategies could be developed with regard to it. I'm not saying that this is the conclusion, but the inputs from these 2 points could have been used effectively in order to ensure that you were writing a good conclusion. It is also very significant to understand here, again in this particular question, you were supposed to comment. It is not discuss, it is not critically evaluate, it is not illustrate, it is not elucidate. So you need to be very, very careful with regard to the demand of the question, with regard to the key directives that have been given here. Next in line is, yes, art and culture, Indian art and culture, very, very important subject. 2 questions were asked from Indian art and culture. One was a 10 marker and one was a 15 marker. One was a 10 marker and one was a 15 marker. So clearly, if you look at it, 55 marks were from Indian art and culture and PIC. 55 marks were from Indian art and culture and PIC alone. You can just imagine. And modern Indian history, yes, 20 more marks there. With regard to Indian art and culture, what could have been the strategy? For the students, first of all, for the candidates who have appeared for the exam, congratulations. I'm sure that you must have had a very, very, certainly it must have been a little overwhelming, very overwhelming actually, but I'm so glad that you have been able to kind of, attempt all of these questions, because clearly this examination is not just the examination about preparation or hard work, but about rigor and perseverance. So clearly it is very important that students who have done it, they should rather not really be overthinking about it and focus more upon, the strategy that lies ahead. But the students who are yet to write, their first mains, or for that matter, who are aspiring for next year, they could also be looking at the very different aspect in which you are supposed to prepare Indian art and culture. So clearly it becomes very important for you to understand here. Indian art and culture, you need to prepare notes with regard to Indian art, architecture and literature, because this is exactly the syllabus that has been given in the GS1 syllabus. Let us see. Analyze the importance of Ashokan inscriptions for reconstructing Mauryan history. It was a 10 marker. It was a 10 marker. Is it the first time that this question was asked in the mains examination? In the mains, yes. But could we really overlook this particular question? Not necessarily. Why do we say that? Because clearly, if you look at it, all of them are the prelims questions for the Ashokan inscriptions, for the Mauryan dynasty. So it is very, very important in 2025, 2022, 2016. Very important. So you should have ensured that you were talking about Mauryan art, Mauryan literature, or for that matter, Mauryan architecture. Becomes very important. Over here, if you look at it, so yes, the Ashokan inscriptions ranging from major rock edicts to minor pillar edicts represent rich legacy and cultural heritage of the Mauryan Empire. A very short but a crisp introduction. Why? Because clearly you have also incorporated a certain information here, that it incorporated major rock edicts and also minor pillar edicts as well. Also, if you look at it, so yes, it is important that you could have also incorporated, some information about Mauryan Empire. Here you could have talked about the time period, 321 BCE to 185 BCE. But if you have not been able to write it, it's totally fine. In the examination pressure, you may not have been able to remember it. Did we not really have to kind of, show something after this, after the introduction? If you were one of those candidates who had their notes prepared, you would have mentioned the major rock edict sites. But even if you were not one of those candidates who may have prepared a map for this, you should have and you must have prepared the map of the Mauryas. Very important. So clearly this is precisely how one kind of, goes about it. Yes, a map of the Mauryas could certainly have been made. If you have not been able to make any graphic, then maybe, if you have an excellent content, then marks are possible. Otherwise, it was a very good opportunity to have more marks. I'm not going to talk about each and every point from this. Yes, I'm not going to talk about, but certainly you could have spoken about, the political aspect, the administrative aspect, the territorial aspect. Yes. Even if you were one of those candidates who actually kind of ensured that they were memorizing all the rock edicts, at least 7 to 8 rock edicts also, if you had the recollection of, you could have still been able to do this question with an ease. But certainly it is important that you should have remembered some examples, because in history, yes, arguments and convictions, they form the very core of the answer, but it is through examples that one kind of adds more and more ornamentation to the answer. So clearly this is precisely how one goes about it. It is important that you were writing about all of these aspects. Yes, nature of kingship, welfare state. For example, major rock edict 7 talks about tolerance. First one talks about, the animal welfare. Yes. Fourth one talks about Dhamma Ghosh, the transition from Bheri Ghosh to Dhamma Ghosh. 13th rock edict, so clearly, and if you look at it, so clearly, what does it really talk about? About the foreign relations that Ashok had, right? So clearly, a lot of things could have been there, but limitations were also to be written here, because clearly the key directive here is analyze. This question becomes very important because this was the first question in GS paper 1. This question, if you were one of those candidates who actually wrote about it comprehensively, you could have convinced the examiner right in the very first question, right in the very first answer. This is why this becomes this may have been a 10 marker from history, but certainly it becomes a very important answer for you, because clearly what you may have wanted to kind of look at here is the comprehensive way in which you could have answered it, and you could have convinced the examiner to look forward to other answers as well that you have written. So this became a very, very decisive answer. Clearly, limitations were also to be written. So clearly Ashok centric, or for that matter with regard to his moral policy and not administrative policies. Yes, very important. Also, if you look at it, so clearly uneven geographical coverage. Yes. So all of these limitations, but did you have to write so many points? Certainly not. You could have just written 2 or 3 points and that's it. This was a 10 marker, 7 plus 1, 7 plus 3, 8 plus 2. 8 points in the first part of the body and 2 points in the second part of the body with regard to limitations, and then a conclusion. Therefore, although limited, the Ashokan inscriptions still remain a direct evidence of Mauryan history, inspiring art of the Shungas and the Satavahanas as well. Why? Because clearly the Mauryan pillars, they became a very, very important source of inspiration for the pillars during the Shung ruler Bhagbhadra, right? So it is very, very important that we were talking about the other important successive events as well, in order to provide a hook in the very conclusion as well for the examiner to look forward to what is there in the conclusion. Next in line is, yes, the architecture of Vijayanagar Empire. The Vijayanagar architecture exemplifies the amalgamation of traditions with contemporary practices. Elucidate with examples. Vijayanagar architecture, yes, very important. But could we really have anticipated a question like this? Very much so. Why? Because not just first time. Maybe Vijayanagar architecture directly may have been asked for the first time. But if you look at it, so yes. If you look at it, so in 2025, they were asking about Chandelas. In 2024, they were asking about the Cholas. In 2023, they were asking about the Pallavas. That means from early medieval to medieval period, these regional dynasties have become very important now. So clearly, if you look at it, so yes, the architecture of Vijayanagar Empire, 14th to 16th centuries, represent a creative synthesis of the earlier South Indian traditions with innovative features shaped by contemporary aesthetic sense and cultural values or influences. We have written a certain information about the Vijayanagar Empire, and then we talked about the contemporary aesthetic sense and cultural values, which certainly shows the impact of, the Vijayanagar Empire, or for that matter, the contemporary architectural practices. Then you could have drawn a certain map of Vijayanagar Empire. Yes, very important. Depicting all the important cities. Yes. Then if you look at it, so you could have divided the entire answer into 2 parts. Yes. The aspects of Vijayanagar Empire, yes. Vijayanagar architecture, yes. For example, the traditional elements. For example, Dravidian temple tradition, or for that matter, elaborate Gopurams, yes. Speaking about certain important aspects of these temples, yes. Virupaksh temple, or for that matter, Hazra Ram temple. But at the same time, you could have also spoken about the contemporary innovations and influences. It could have been a major aspect here with regard to Vijayanagar architecture. For example, the Indo-Islamic synthesis, or for that matter, if you look at it, so clearly temple market integration, or for that matter, natural landscape integration. So clearly you could have just, spoken about the architecture of the Cholas. You could have spoken about the architecture of the Hoysalas. You could have spoken about the architecture of the Pallavas. Yes, maybe they may not have been contemporary, but if you were one of those candidates who was running short of points, you could have still ensured that you were depicting it very, very categorically that Vijayanagar was rather a synthesis of all of these architectural patterns. Thus, Vijayanagar architecture was neither a mere continuation of the past nor an imitation of external styles, comma. It selectively absorbed older South Indian traditions and contemporary influences to create a distinct architectural idiom vividly visible in the monuments of Hampi. Again, you are giving a very important piece of information here with regard to Hampi. So clearly, this is precisely how you could have incorporated a certain conclusion here. So, if you are one of those candidates who has been able to give these appear for the exam and been able to attempt all the questions, certainly all the very best. My best wishes are with you. But if you are one of those candidates who is aspiring for next year, who is still struggling with the mode of preparation, I can only tell you one thing, that be it PIC or for that matter Indian art and culture, 3 steps remain very, very important. What is the future course of strategy? Yes, notes, PYQs and answer writing. These are the 3 ratna of the preparation for mains. What is the role of 3 ratna in Buddhism? So if one follows 3 ratna, then one gets nirvana, right? Enlightenment. And therefore, it is 3 ratna of preparation for mains is notes, that you should have a very consolidated material. Then you should make sure that your notes are in sync with the PYQs. And then if all of it is in place, then you should also simultaneously practice answer writing in order to feel more and more confident that you are closer to nirvana in terms of mains, right? So this is precisely how you are supposed to go about it. Again, it is very important for us to understand here that yes, note making is important, analysis of PYQs is very important. The clarity and the comprehensive overview in the answer writing is very important. If you have all of these 3 things in grip, certainly mains, or for that matter the success in mains, is not very far. This year's paper, it may have looked easy, yes, but at the same time, it also tells us the very importance of a good content that we should have for the examination, or for that matter, the very importance of PYQs.
So here we have 6 different directive words that have been used. And very briefly, we're going to go over those directive words because these different directive words have been used in the questions that have been asked to us, and that decide the structure of the answer. So we have evaluate, which basically means look at what the positives are, what the gains are, and what the negatives are, and then you provide your judgment. If there is another direction of evaluation given, then you talk about what is that specific evaluation of, which would be mentioned in the question. Critically examine requires not only the criticism or the opposite point, but it also requires the first mainstay of what the question has asked. So the diagnosis of what is really going on and the counterpoint to that. The illustration requires often some examples, but with slightly more detail than simply examples. Explain requires us to talk about in more detail, breaking out whatever is given in the sentence and often provide evidence of it. Substantiate requires us to provide proof for whatever has been said by providing maybe data points or providing examples also, but linking logic alongside. And then comment, this kind of directive word has more scope for writing in first person language. Obviously, we're not writing personal views, but we can have more assortment of views quoted maybe by other people or relevant facts in order to argue around a central structure. Now, let us look at the first question. The first question is evaluate the impact of globalization. So the directive word is evaluate the impact of globalization on specifically Indian youth. Now we know a lot of content on the impact of globalization on the Indian society. This is specifically with regards to the youth. And now they've given the limiting phrases also with reference to social, political, economic and cultural spheres. So in fact, the examiner has laid out a very specific task for us. impact of globalization we are to evaluate on the Indian youth with regards to these 4 parameters, spheres. So with this spec approach, with the social, political, economic and cultural approach, what we're going to do with our answer is we're going to provide a positive and a challenge aspect to each of these different spheres in our answer. First paragraph is going to be our introduction, and the last paragraph is going to be the conclusion, the justification, the summary of that evaluation, because the directive word was evaluation. So we're going to take a look at what that evaluation is. So for the social domain, we're going to see how the agency and the aspirations of people, now that there are all these digital networks with globalization, there is more migration, there is more cross-border, globalized and westernized education as well, and all those interlinkages and friendships. So aspirations have increased, but simultaneously, as people move to different places and communities break down, loneliness has increased, and the digital divides and which side you are on has changed. With regards to the political aspect, the vernacular of the global, vernacular means the dictionary, the dictum of the global rights movements, whether that is the climate change movement or the Me Too movement or the gender rights assertion, all of that has become part of it. And global currents of maybe that is Gen Z or network movements have been enabled by the digital social media networks. But simultaneously, there has also been polarization, because social media creates echo chambers and groupthink leads to group polarization. Well, on the economic aspect, we're going to see new opportunities come up, especially with a low entry barrier. For example, in the gig economy, there are opportunities for mass employment, but that is not gender neutral. And also, we find that it can lead to algorithms determining people's lives and social security access being insufficient. So we'll talk about this theme. The cultural aspect with regards to identities, one aspect is definitely the westernization impacting us, but then the globalization is also happening, which means that the Indian is combining with the global. Our final current here is going to be on the hybridization identity. What that means is that the Indian social institutions are going to determine how we are going to respond to the Western influence that is coming to us. And we are going to take that hybridization logic with regards to our conclusion here. Let us take a look at the answer. So, globalization, the first paragraph, we are going to talk about globalization and its impact. So we are precise. We're directly starting on the point. We're not beating around the bush by creating a background because we don't have that space. So we are saying globalization intensifies cross-border flows of what? Of capital, money, people, technology, and ideas. And the Indian youth, which is where we have to pinpoint our impact, they are both the carriers and the most exposed, meaning the most impacted aspect of this globalization. So the first social aspect, we are creating one paragraph each, one for social, one for economic, and so on and so forth, getting around with the themes that we just spoke about. So socially, we're going to say that there has been global education, migration, digital networks, and networks widen aspirations, friendship, and awareness of gender and sexuality. However, ascriptive controls, ascriptive means to say the traditional controls, let's just say of family and caste and gender and all those institutions, they are becoming weaker, right? But conversely, individuals are also comparing themselves, right? And there is transnational mobility, and this leads to negative results also: loneliness, intergenerational conflict, and a sharp English digital class divide. So that's our first paragraph. I mean, after the first paragraph, that's our second paragraph, the first content paragraph. And then we look at the economical aspect. And again, we end up saying that, all right, some things have been good. And so the IT BPO, startups, global capability centers, remote works, overseas education, all of this has enabled what? The positive aspect. All right, more employment opportunities, especially with the gig economy. And we've thrown a data point. But we're going to say there's a negative aspect to this also, and which is that incomes are insecure, the algorithms are controlling people, and that can become oppressive, and social security structures are weak. And we're going to throw some data points in order to substantiate what we're saying. Then we come to the next paragraph, which is the political aspect. And we say, well, the vernacular, as we talked about, of climate justice, feminism, human rights, Me Too, online petitions, all of that has increased. But there is a negative aspect, and that is that the misinformation, the echo chambers, the polarization, all of that has also increased with social media. Culturally, the fourth aspect of this, we're going to say, well, K-pop, global sport, food and fashion, the cosmopolitan tastes, all of this is the global aspect of the culture impact on the Indian youth. And there is globalization, which means mixing of the local and the global. But it also has a negative aspect, which is consumerism, led behavior, body image pressures, linguistic language, that is erosion, and potential of cultural backlash. Now, these are the main four content paras that we're going to have. And then we're going to come around to our main judgment takeaway, which we're going to say that while agency has expanded, but capabilities are unequal and insecurities have been externalized. So what should be done? We should be working on the aspect of skills, gig economy protection, the mental health impact of working with the sector and the insecurity, ensuring digital literacy, and protecting cultural pluralism. This is going to be our line of conclusion in the conclusion. Next question that we have had, let us take a look. Critically examine the challenges of demographic transition in contemporary India. The question is asking us to critically examine the challenges of what? Demographic transition. A lot of the data points that we are going to take here are going to be from the National Family Health Survey 6, which just came around some time back and gave us good relevant data points. We are talking about in contemporary India, so we're talking about our modern problems. This is 250 words. Let us take a look how we end up structuring it with our content flow. So our first main assertion is that there are two kinds of things that are happening. One is that youth is being unemployed. Youth is unemployed. So one aspect of it is that the demographic potential that we have, we are not able to exploit it effectively because that requires us to have good quality education and skill and the youths to be healthy, and then it also to be distributed properly with regards to gender benefits and rural, urban, and the across of region of India, south and north, right? And on the other end, we have the second part of the challenge, which is that there is aging happening and this demographic potential is not going to remain there forever. So there are these two big strands of the idea that we're dealing with this in answer. So one aspect we're seeing fertility decline and lower child dependency. So this is happening in the southern states. So what is happening is different across regions. In southern India, the fertility rates are declining much faster. And in northern India, it is still higher. There is the working age bulge, which is there more in North India, and South India is aging faster. And this also means cross-border migration. It also means more intensified politics, son of the soil politics, and discussions around federalism and the constitutional safeguards over it. Now, on the other end, we have population aging and all the consequences that come with it, including how those pensions are going to be paid for from the state, and do the people have access to pensions who are working in the informal sector? Questions with regards to geriatric care. And what about when we do not have that demographic potential which is driving our economy, then the macro impact of slowdown on the economy? How these elders are going to be cared for and whether sufficient money and allocation has been put for that is also another aspect of it. So that's the broad framework that we are dealing with regards to this answer. Let us take a look at how we have structured it in the actual answer. So we've said that the national average, which is 2.0, basically the National Family Health Survey states that the TFR, total fertility rate, which is the average of how many children are being born, and 2.1 is the replacement ratio, and we are at 2.0, which is broadly saying that we are replacing the two people, that is mother and father, with two children, and the population is neither increasing nor decreasing at an intergenerational level. But this is just a summary number. It is not talking about everything that is going on beneath this number, because there are diversified stories across India and its patterns. So the demographic transition is the movement from high birth rate. So first paragraph, basically what we've done is we've simply defined what this demographic transition means, as we just spoke about. Then in the paragraph after that, what we've put up is the fact that there is a large working age population and it needs to be employed properly. But is it being employed? We've thrown around a number from the periodic labor force survey data, and we've said that there are challenges to it, such as informal work, underemployment, weak learning. So we've questioned the employment part of it from the first part of the logic. That is, are we able to exploit our potential demographic dividend? Then in the second part, we are talking about whether there is good health. And we've also picked up a gendered example of it, meaning for this potential demographic dividend to be properly used, there has to be good health. And we've used this stunting data that we have from National Family Health Survey 6, right, to point out that health is both differentially distributed on gendered patterns and there is malnutrition. Next, the third paragraph that we have, we've said we are that there are different stories going across different parts of India, right? So between north and south, there are different number of youth, right? So southern India is experiencing faster fertility decline, and this is leading to labor migration, strains in housing and services, that son of the soil politics, like for example, Maharashtra only for the Marathis or Bengal only for the Bengalis, and such kind of currents pretty much multiple states. So this may sharpen and further crystallize the fiscal and the delimitation disputes that we are having at the legal and the political structure level, because the fundamentals are changing, and that creates critical challenge for us. Then in the next paragraph, we've talked about the elderly issue, that the elderly are aging fast. We've thrown around a number here from the United Nations Fund for the Population, right? And which says that, all right, this is 20% are the number of elderly we're going to have by 2050 in India. And then we say, well, what does that mean? That means that many people in the informal sector are not going to be having pensions. There is the aspect of feminization of aging, meaning women have higher life expectancy than men, and women often do not own property in their own name, and that creates special challenges with regards to our policy towards the elderly. There are the non-communicable diseases on the rise, and that is a lot of outpatient department expenditure, and we'll have to deal with that. The elder care needs and the burden on the public finances, because the state will have to foot the bill. There are going to be lesser people in the tax-paying bracket, but more people in the elderly age bracket needing care. And where are we going to get the funds from? So the fifth and the final paragraph is about the fact that families are going to be smaller, there is going to be more migration, and so the home-based care model is going to be challenged yet still more. And existing issues such as son preference may still continue to exist, even though fertility rates are going to be declining. So as the last paragraph, where we're going to say, what is the way ahead? We're going to emphasize on saying, well, we should facilitate reproductive choice. We should have emphasis on jobs and skill, more aspect on portable welfare with regards to the migrants, and pensions for those who are in the informal sector. So schemes like Atal Pension Yojana and others, we focus on more making effective. And geriatric care, you can talk about, let's say, national health program, and how do we focus on that and just do that more. The care economy and making sure that that is a very vibrant economy. So that is the line of argument for our final paragraph. Then we come to our next question, and that question is caste disappearing in urban India? Illustrate your answer with examples. Is caste disappearing in urban India? Illustrate your answer with examples. So the question seems quite straightforward, and for understanding the answer, the structure of it, first of all, the main point that we have is that while caste is losing the ritual aspect of the visibility, the traditions that were associated with it, the customs that were associated with it, but for the capacity for closing social opportunities, doors towards opportunities, that kind of still remains, right? So the intergenerational passing down of disabilities or limitations or social exclusion, that kind of still exists. And how is that? That's then we are going to explore in the main part of our answer. So the first part of that answer is going to be that the form of caste is weakening in multiple ways. And that is that, well, we have more public interaction. So there are common schools in a transports and restaurants and workspaces, and all of the physical distancing that is reducing. The occupation, the linkage of caste to occupation is declining. The social mobility barriers, they are getting reduced and they are getting fragmented and they're getting broken because we have, mass education and we have migration and we have nuclear families, meaning which are able to place less limitations on people, right? And alongside that, we also have new economic opportunities like the IT industry and the gig economy, which are to a large number of degree, they are kind of caste blind. And so that creates opportunities for people. With regards to our assertion, we are going to say that there is the Dalit middle class that has arisen, although not very thick, but also there is the reservation and digital anti-caste public, meaning on the online social media platforms. So all of this with regards to the urban setting is making caste lesser prominent, especially in its traditional customary outlook. However, that doesn't mean caste is out of the window. And why is that? Especially because marriage, the most strong intergenerational thing that maintains caste, it continues to be dominant because only 5% of the marriages are kind of love marriages and intercaste marriages. In the beginning, 95% are within the caste structure. And the new digital platforms, websites that facilitate caste also continue to provide caste filters, facilitate marriage, continue to provide caste filters. And this continues to happen in the same way. Housing areas are concentrated still based on caste, and while they may not use the word caste, they use the word community and surnames and ask about food choices to maintain in a proxy way similar kind of differences, especially to Dalit exclusion, which is much more prominent, while other castes do end up mingling up. With regards to the markets, there are still referrals through which you get your jobs and your opportunities. Schooling access is still riddled with multiple access issues, and the inherited capital. Here, the inherited capital means to say not just money, but your social and cultural capital, your ways of life. What we have a guy called Pierre Bourdieu who calls habitus. What that basically means is all your symbolic capital. People look at things and judge you from which class you're on. Like, for example, speaking fluent English is often a product of having educated parents. And at the time of admission, that can be a criteria for admission to the school, apart from asking your address and apart from asking your surname. And that still ends up resulting in caste differences with regards to access to opportunities. And politics, we talk about how there are political associations on caste basis, there is reservation, and that affects urban areas as well, because job politics is a very much part of urban area, right? And enumeration, like caste enumeration exercises that we are now doing with the census collecting caste data as well, that reinvigorates the caste aspect of it. So that's the broad structure of it. And this is where we've put the answer. So we've said that urban anonymity, that is nobody knows anyone, oftentimes community character weakens caste, but however marriage and the markets, how they work, they continue to reproduce caste. That's our kind of main opening statement. And or let's just say the central gist, our first paragraph is that urbanization has weakened, but then there is the system of endogamy, the networks, the unequal social capital, and caste is de-ritualized but not de-institutionalized, right? So we have all of these paragraphs, right, with the similar kind of logic. So we've structured it. So the first paragraph after this one, the content one. This paragraph is going to talk about all those things that we just talked about, weakening caste, and then we are going to put down all those factors which are still maintaining caste that we just spoke about. And after we've done that, we come to pretty much the conclusion. The conclusion is that caste is neither disappearing, but nor is it unchanging, meaning it is changing. It is not disappearing, but it is changing its character. So you can think about that the ritual aspects of caste are becoming less important, and the secular aspects, meaning especially the aspects which are related to economy and the opportunities, they continue to remain, right? Through tools that we talked about. So urban caste is a modern system of social closure, meaning closure of opportunities, especially with regards to residential opportunities, with access regards to education opportunities, with regards to business avenues, and with regards to job opportunities, and even political participation and representation. So that closure continues to be the case. So this is our line of argument for our next answer. Now, we're going to look at the next question, which is, do you think digital technology promotes social empowerment? Explain with examples. Do you think digital technology promotes social empowerment? Explain with examples. We're going to pepper our answer with a lot of the different social schemes and the initiatives that are running in India in order to make every point that we're going to make in this answer. So what's going to be the broader content structure here? We're going to make one important point here, that access, which means that there are connections and devices and the internet functionality and all of that technical aspect of it is there. Yes, right. And it is affordable, right? Meaning people can actually, for example, they have data is cheap and they have mobile phones and they are able to have access to it despite the fact whether it's rural or urban divide, or it is gendered divide, or it is a caste based divide, or it is some other sort of a divide. So then capability, do people know how to use it? Are they familiar with it? And then agency, does their voice matter? Are they able to control? Are they able to have their choice in how these systems are being designed and how they impact them? Does government authority have accountability, answerability with dependability, responsiveness? Is there accountability? This is something that we are to ensure. And if that is the case, then we have the kind of outcomes that we are looking for, which is the development in income, learning, health, participation outcomes. All of that is going to be better. But essentially, what is the axis of our answer? Our axis of our answer is, we often end up thinking when we say digital technology, we end up talking about access mostly. But we need to focus on capability and, more importantly, agency, to be able to make sure that this is empowerment and not just the digital technology being out there. So here, the first paragraph, we are going to say that digital technology promotes social empowerment, but when it is able to expand people's capabilities, voice and control, not just simply through access. Now, because the question said with examples, that's what we're going to do. We're going to make our points with examples. So economically, we're going to say the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile banking, DBT, right? It worked pretty well. Yes. So we're going to provide an example. And these are all examples of access, right, from the digital technology. We're going to say the UPI world has created a lot of these merchant transactions which have come over the traditional limitations of banking. And then from the education and health perspective, so one we've chosen from like the government schemes, another we've chosen from financial inclusion aspect, another we've chosen from educational and health, saying that programs and platforms like Diksha, Swayam and eSanjeevani are further providing digital technology access. Then we are going to choose the fourth dimension of that, that is social media with regards to digital technology access. And we're going to say it provides visibility to all sections with Me Too, anti-caste, disability rights voices, grievance portals, tele-law, all of that to improve state accountability. So in this paragraph, what we've done is we've just picked up different dimensions of what this digital technology through government and through market interfaces look like towards empowerment. And now we get to making our subsequent point. We say, however, this technology in itself is not simply empowering. It usually just reproduces existing power structures. Because who has the device access in the family, whether man or woman? So based on gender or rural and urban divide, digital divide, and whether disability has been factored in for, right? This excludes many people, and we put in a data point from the National Family Health Survey. We end up saying that there are the regular issues with existing digital technology access already. That is the algorithmic bias, because the training data based on which algorithms work have been coming from basically the existing data, which is already riddled with caste and gender and community and region and religion bias. And that is being used to feed the data, the algorithms. And then now they are the ones making the decision. And so the bias continues. Online abuse, misinformation, surveillance, fraud, biometric authentication failure, which ends up being a significant thing, whether it's the elderly or maybe some people whose signature or biometric authentication doesn't work, right? Through apps, as we've seen in MG Narega, that can be an issue at the last mile. So technology is an amplifier. It increases whatever the fundamental case is. Technology itself is not either empowering or disempowering. It just amplifies what is already happening, right? So it is not an automatic equalizer. If you want it to be an equalizer, then what we have to do is we've got to focus on affordable access, digital literacy, accessible design, privacy and data rights, human alternatives for essential services, when technology doesn't work properly, and accountable platforms. So digital cannot mean hands off, right? There has to be accountability from the government side. So this is our last paragraph. And that's broadly the structure for this answer. Then our next question is, how do you understand disability? How do you understand disability? And then we have to substantiate the need for inclusive policy framework in India in this regard. So what do we have to substantiate? The need for the inclusive policy framework in India in this regard. In which regard? In regard for how we understand disability. So the first thing we are going to talk about in our answer is, what is disability? And the first thing we are going to emphasize is that disability is not simply equatable to impairment, a physical or a mental issue that somebody is going through. That is not disability. Because that impairment in itself is just a situation. If it is met with barriers which could be the attitudes of people or governance institutions, or built, for example, infrastructural barriers which may limit mobility or access, or digital barriers with regards to the digital infrastructure that exists, or the institutional barriers if they do not provide access with regards to facilitating participation or the use of amenities, well, then that leads to disability. So disability is a social concept. Whatever that individual is going through, physically or mentally or both, that itself is not disability. It is only when it meets with the barriers that it creates disability. So our focus in the answer with regards to inclusive policy framework is to remove these barriers. And that requires proactive step, because by default, the barriers already are getting perpetuated through the system. So it requires not only to remove the barriers, but rather to do something to actively make sure that the barriers are removed, right? Not work with a by default situation. So here we're going to talk about inclusion being equal citizenship. Like we talk about citizenship as social citizenship also with regards to Article 38, the concept of welfare. And this inclusive, that is Sarvodaya through Antodaya, focuses on equal participation. Now, the first paragraph, we're going to mention very clearly that disability is not an individual medical defect. The idea that we just talked about, that it is only when it meets institutional barriers or attitudinal barriers that is. So that first definition, that is what we're going to highlight here. The second paragraph is going to be about us talking about the fact that, well, these are the numbers, throwing some figures and facts, that these are the numbers that have been given to us by census 2011, which point out that disability continues to exist, meaning that there are barriers in the system, and that is reflected in these kind of figures. So this is a depiction of reality where we currently are, before we end up emphasizing on what ought to be the case with inclusive policy frameworks. So because we are to focus on the need, so first we are emphasizing where the need is. That is the current situation with these figures. Then we come around and say, well, India does have this, Rights of People with Disability Act 2016. And we have this Rajiv Ratori 2024 judgment where the Supreme Court has said that it is mandatory to provide all these accessibility standards. We can obviously go ahead and say that India does have that Accessible India campaign, and we have programs for that. But then what we now make out the case for in this paragraph is what kind of inclusive policy framework should we have. And so here we talk about universal design and reasonable accommodation, early intervention, like for children, right, that we do have, and you can mention programs that we already have with regards to that amongst the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. And then inclusive schools and examinations, enforceable, that is key to it, enforceable 4% government jobs and 5% higher education reservation, which like the RPWD also talks about, but this has to be enforceable on the ground. Accessible transport and digital services, social protection, disability disaggregated data, meaning when we are looking at total data, then it should provide us separate already processed data, right, about how the people with disability are being impacted, or people with impairments are being impacted, and is it disability, right? Persons with disabilities should co-design. Now, this is an important concluding line. Should co-design and audit policy. So nothing about us without us is our tagline here. So inclusion is citizenship. Now, this is the structure for this answer. And then the last question that we're dealing with here, unity in diversity remains the defining feature of Indian society despite the challenges from communalism and regionalism. Comment. So here, unity in diversity has to be pointed out. How does it, what are the fundamental features of this unity in diversity, so that we are able to say, well, these are the features which make it the continuing defining feature of Indian society. And then we are going to pick up what are the challenges from communalism and regionalism. Communalism is negative pretty much in all angles, but regionalism, we will provide the qualifying condition also, right? Saying that regionalism can be positive given certain conditions and can be democratic given certain conditions. Now, first of all, the foundations. That is, the unity rests on accommodation, not sameness. We are not going to kill the diversity to everybody becoming the same. That is not what unity means. It means that we are able to cooperate with each other. We are going to use our diversification to our common end. How does it work in modern India? What are the foundations of this? We have layered identities. So we have Muslims and Malayalis. We have Tamilians and Indians. We have North Indians and South Indians who are migrating across borders. And with this migration, their economies are codependent. We have religious syncretism. We have people who are celebrating common festivals. We have religions which have mixed over with each other, and they have the common character which does not exist in isolated pockets. And that is also informing the identities of people. We have markets that depend upon this diversity of people. we have the popular culture which reinforces it and creates the active give and take and influence stage where these identities, interests, ideas get exchanged between people of various different diverse sections. So this is the foundation. Institutionally, what is the foundation? We have secularism, we have rights, especially for protecting minority rights and for ensuring everyone has rights. We have rights protecting linguistic diversity and federalism, which ensures the regional diversity is protected and minority rights are protected. This is the institutional framework which ensures, because the question says continuing relevance of the unity and diversity. And we say with both of these points that this is the continuing diversity. Then we talk about the challenges, the communal antagonism, the conflict, the exclusionary regionalism, that is the regionalism with the negative impact. And both of these are magnified by uneven development, meaning both communalism and the exclusionary regionalism, meaning regionalism can be of two types. The one with the problematic, both of these are actually magnified by uneven development. And then we come to the critical final point that we have of the judgment. We say, well, regionalism by itself can in many cases deepen democracy when accommodated. Exclusionary regionalism, that is the problem. So this is our, this is the takeaway towards the end. We've substantiated what the question has asked, and we've pointed out what is the way moving forward, right? We distinguish between types of regionalism and we accommodate the one that can be productive to us. So the first paragraph basically makes out the case for the fact that there is so much diversity. The second paragraph here gives that idea that we talked about, that there is the layering, the foundations of diversity that we talked about. That is the second paragraph. Now, this foundations is both the foundations and the institutional basis. So that's what we talk about in the second paragraph. The third paragraph, we talk about the fact that now there are challenges, and these challenges are in the form of communalism, and these challenges are in the form of exclusionary regionalism. And then we come to the next paragraph and say, well, not all regionalism is problematic. Well, when we have regionalism, we can also have that giving expression to regional identities. We can have that cooperative federalism, the competitive and cooperative federalism. We can work together, learn with each other, identify the low-hanging fruits, and use in a complementary fashion each other's strengths. For example, North India has more youth and South India has a faster declining fertility rate. And right now, that means that the markets can benefit from what is the varying situation, right, with regards to that. So we have pointed out various aspects of that complementarity. And pretty much that brings to end this answer for 150 words. To reiterate, finally, when we read a question, what we've got to do, first paragraph, we define very precisely what has been asked. Second, we organize second paragraph, we organize the dimensions of whatever different angles are there. Then in the third paragraph, we illustrate with examples or we substantiate. The fourth, we qualify the claim. We provide maybe alternative viewpoints, some contradiction, or whatever else needs to be considered, in which conditions that would be valid. And then we conclude with a balanced judgment depending upon how the directive word asked us, whether it was evaluate or critically comment or something else. And based on that, we frame our final paragraph. And that is broadly how we are dealing with it.
We are starting our discussion with the geography question, and sequentially we will also understand the questions of environment, right? The very first question is about the Fujiwara effect and its impacts on the moment and intensity of the tropical cyclone. So this is of 10 marks, 150 words. In this, directly you can start your answer with the Fujiwara effect, mentioning what is Fujiwara effect. So what is Fujiwara effect? Please understand. For example, there is, let's say this is the Indian Ocean, and here the two cyclones or the more are, let's say, originated. This cyclone's eye, that is, if you are aware, what is the eye? For example, here it is the cyclone, and in between the calm area, means both of the side you will see the clouds, the rainfall, but here a kind of calm region will be there. That is I, the common low pressure center that is of the tropical cyclone. If the eyes of the two cyclones are separated only by 1400 kilometer or less, then there are very high chances that their winds can merge together. This merging or the interaction of the winds together will make a combination of these two cyclones or more cyclones. This combination will be connected with the limb, and this limb will create a very vigorous type of patterns of whirling or cyclone formation, right? So this is known as Fujiwara effect. Now this Fujiwara effect in turn can impact the tropical cyclones in two ways. Number one, it can intensify the tropical cyclone and their strength, and also it can result in change in their tracks. Their tracks may become very unpredictable. We will see this with the help of some examples also. Now here, the body part in the next part means what you are going to discuss, right? So in the introduction, you have written Fujiwara effect. In the body part, now we are going to discuss the effects in detail. There are 5 types of the effects that this let's say cyclone can have due to this Fujiwara or due to this merging of the winds. Now see here, these effects are 5. One is the direction. Their direction can be altered, can become unpredictable. The another 2 possibilities are, let's say the smaller cyclone, which is out of the 2, it can completely strain out or partially strain out. Strain out means it may lose its temper or its let's say strength. However, majorly we have seen this could also result in partial merger and the complete merger of the 2 cyclone. So when Fujiwara effect, we say this all 5 possibilities are there. However, in case of this merging especially, the cyclones will become very intense and their paths will become highly unpredictable. After explaining these 5 effects, now we will be giving the statement, that is, the Fujiwara effect can change the intensity, the rainfall patterns, the paths of the, let's say, cyclones, as well as it can also affect the landfall patterns of the cyclone. One by one, we will understand with the help of example, right? So this is the old example of Mary and Kathy cyclones of this 1964. In this Mary and Kathy cyclones, what exactly happened? They too, when they merged together, this led to their intensification. And this intensification further led to a lot of rainfall in this area. So their rainfall was very immensely affected by this Fujiwara effect. This is the one example. Now, the second example, this is the Parma and the Malheur combination of 2009. This exactly we are talking about somewhere near Philippines. In this Philippine Parma cyclone, this got intensified, number one, after the, let's say, interaction with the Malheur cyclone near the Philippines. Number one, its intensification happened. Second, there is one island, that is Luzon Island. Luzon Island. So over this Luzon Island, it became almost stagnant for some days. So why it became stagnant? Because of this Fujiwara effect. After interaction with the Malheur, it was staying over this Luzon, and also it resulted into a lot of land let's say slides in events in that area, as well as a lot of this rainfall patterns, right? So here it was stagnant, and also it took 3 landfalls to dissipate, right? 3 landfall. One landfall means, you understand if landfall, what is landfall? Whenever the cyclone hit the land area, its source of moisture will be cut, and therefore often these cyclones will dissipate. However, the Parma cyclone was not dissipating even after 3 such hit to the land areas, means 3 landfall. So its behavior, see here, its behavior changed, it got intensified. Its behavior changed. It was stagnant over the Luzon Island for a good amount of time. Its behavior also changed because it was taking 3 landfall again and again, hitting and getting re-intensified. Why? Because of this merger of the cyclones. This is the example of the Parma and the Malheur, right? Now see here, also its path was very unpredictable, means something which cannot be predicted. What is the behavior of the cyclone? It was something, the example of unpredictable cyclone, right? The next set of example that we do have, that is the cyclone of Saroja and Odete. This was in the Indian Ocean of 2021. Saroja cyclone, it hit the Indonesian region. After hitting the Indonesia, it created a lot of rainfall there. After creating floods, landslides in the Indonesian region, its intensity should have decreased. But what happened is when it was moving closer to the Australia, so this is the Australia, here when it came, it interacted with the Odete, and this Fujiwara effect, means merging of these two, resulted into again the re-intensification of Saroja. And this Saroja also became highly unpredictable. Okay. In the same way, it was unpredictable to make a chart of its route, where it will go, what would be, let's say, its landfall patterns. It was something very difficult to predict, right? So this is the example of Saroja, re-intensification, unpredictable path, the behavior, rainfall and the landfall behavior. This was something, it was caused by this Fujiwara effect. One more thing I got to remember about this Parma cyclone. It took around, let's say, 3 or 4 times U-turns again and again. It was going, then again coming back in the same area. So let's say this was the pattern. It was going again, coming back into the same area. So it was taking a lot of U-turns in that trajectory, making this cyclone of Parma highly unpredictable, right? So with this sort of examples, you can explain exactly with the examples how their intensity, how their behavior, and how their rainfall and landfall patterns can be changed. Okay, that is it in the first question. Okay, that is it. In the last, you can say, therefore, it is with the Fujiwara effect, many a times the intensity of the cyclone and their unpredictable behavior is something which causes a lot of damage. It becomes very difficult for the early warning system also, because you cannot predict this path. Okay, that is it. The next question, if we see, what is the next question? The next question is about aeolian process in desertification and land degradation. Now, what are aeolian processes? It is related to the winds, what winds can cause. For example, in this winds, we have the 3, let's say, processes, aeolian processes. Number 1 process is, let's say, the erosion. That wind can cause erosion, right? Second is transportation. It can also transport the sand and other material in especially desert areas. And then it's deposition, which can create kind of, let's say, barkans, parabolic dune, and other type of dunes, means the sand hills. Okay, these are the aeolian processes. Now the question is asking, discuss the role of aeolian processes in desertification and land degradation. So first, if we understand what is the role of these 3 processes in the desertification. So now see here, one by one we will discuss. See here, the first one, see here, the erosion, the transportation, and the deposition we have written in this 3 headings, right? With the erosion, what can happen? The soil can be eroded. The evaporation rate can increase. This rate of evaporation, if it will increase, it will lead to what? Loss of moisture will become very faster. The loss of moisture, if it is there, so it will lead to what? Hydrological stress in that area, which will further lead to what? Desertification. Then what can happen? The wind is known for, see here, if I show you, see here, if we discuss this one, see here, if we talk about the winds, so winds are known for what? The, see here, if the desert it is, in the lower levels, the winds, when they are moving close to the surface, they will have with them the sand particles also. Now, because of the sand particles, they will have the abrasion power, the erosion power, right? So they will hit the surfaces with great, let's say, erosive power. So often what happens is, these winds which are on the surface, they can carve out this kind of hollows, right? Depressions. So this kind of depressions can be created. They are known as deflation hollow. Now, when such deflation hollows are created, it creates difficulty for that area's vegetation as well as agricultural productivity, right? Because the this topsoil has been completely removed. A depression has been carved out, right? So in that way, deflation hollows can be created in a region because of this soil related erosion. Let me go there. See here. So this is the role of erosion. The upper soil, if it is eroded, what will happen? Desertification. The evaporation, the loss of moisture, it can also lead to what? Desertification. So in this way, it can result into desertification. The role of erosion, see here, this is the role of erosion. Now, when we talk about transportation, so for example, the sand is transported from the Thar desert of Rajasthan to new areas. It will lead to what? Extension of this desert. Thankfully, we have Aravallis, so that this Thar desert is limited to the western side of the Rajasthan, or we can say to the western side of the Aravallis. Aravallis are creating effective barrier. Otherwise, this could have reached to the let's say the areas of Delhi also. However, the impact is spreading. The Thar desert is continuously spreading. So see here, let's say this is the Rajasthan and here it is the Aravalli. So this Thar desert is now limited here, but it is still spreading because the sand can be transported by the winds. So when the sand is transported in new areas, the new areas will see nothing but the deposition of the sand, and therefore desertification will extend itself, right? The sand storms, especially originating in such areas, they will reach into the zones. For example, there is some sand storm here. So with this sand storm, a lot of sand will transport in new areas, and there it will lead to what? Desertification. So this is how transportation can lead to the extension of the deserts in the new areas. Okay. Now, whenever this, let's say the transportation is there, it can come with a lot of sand particle, right? This sand particles, when they are deposited in the new areas, the upper soil, let's say this was the fertile area. This was the fertile area, and here you had some vegetation. For example, this is some vegetation. Now this area, because of the sand transportation in, let's say, this area I'm talking about, so what will happen? The sand is deposited. It will lead to what? Not only the loss of fertility, or let's say the burial of this fertile soil, but also it will lead to burial of this crop also. So this deposition will lead to vegetation burial. And if the vegetation is buried, this will further and reinforce the cycle of desertification. So in that way, you can explain with the help of some examples. The examples, if you want to give India specific example, you can put in the example of Thar desert and its behavior. Also, a very important example that you can take here, that is of the Andhra Pradesh, that is Anantapur district of the Andhra Pradesh. Anantapur district. This Anantapur district is known for this aridity, and also it is the desertification is extending here. It is the example for both, not only desertification, but also it is the example of land degradation here, right? So Anantapur is experiencing this. You can mention this as a case study. And here, how this desertification or land degradation is going on. Number one, lack of rainfall. Number two, aeolian process, where the dry areas, from dry areas, the sand is being transported. Because of this, the rate of evaporation has increased and the soil has lost its, let's say, the nutrients also. Okay. So that is how the process is going on in the Anantapur. The second part is about land degradation, how this aeolian processes can lead to the desertification we have discussed. The second part is land degradation. So here, see this. In the land degradation, see here, what if the soil erosion is stripping apart? If the upper soil is stripped, now upper soil, there can be humus. It can be rich in humus. Now, when the upper soil is removed, humus content may also be removed. And therefore, what will happen? It will lead to lack of fertility. It will lead to also nothing but what? Degradation of the soil. Number one. Number two, especially in the upper layer, clay, if it is there, clay is found. The clay is a very fine sedimentary rock, right? Clay, if you understand. The clay is also very important, especially for ion exchange in the soil. When the clay is removed, as it is finer, it can be transported by the winds easily. As the clay is removed, it can lead to what? Loss of, again, nutrients. Loss of nutrients, and this loss of nutrient is something which will lead to what? Degradation of that area's land and soil. Then the vegetation itself can be lost. Why the vegetation will be lost? See here, for example, this is some vegetation. Here, let's say the winds are moving from the, let's say, desert area. These winds are having the sand particles with them. With this sand particles, if they will hit the vegetation, because of their erosive power, the vegetation may be eroded also. So vegetation, when it is eroded, it will ultimately die, and this will again reinforce the cycle of land desertification or degradation. Why degradation? Because vegetation, if it is you are removing, it will lead to what? Of course, the land degradation. Okay. And the last but not the least, say here, a lot of sand, when it is transported, the sand can be deposited in the new areas over the vegetation, over the leaves, making them, let's say, very prone to what? Photosynthesis failure, or lack of photosynthesis would be there. Photosynthesis, when the leaves are covered with the sand, it is very difficult for these leaves to do this photosynthesis, and therefore ultimately they may also die. This will how this is going to lead to again desertification. Okay, so this is, you can explain again, you can give the example here of what, you can give the example of the case study, that is Anantapur district. In this way you can conclude your answer. In the conclusion you can say land degradation and desertification is something, if you want to give data in the introduction may you could have given, if not in the introduction you can here discuss, that is land degradation is something which is, let's say, around 1/3 of the land in the world is considered to be degraded. 1/3 to 1/4. Okay, it is variations. Variations are because of what? Because of the land degradation definition is different according to different countries, right? So in this way, the land degradation and the desertification has become a very vigorous problem, recurring problem in the areas. And considering the food security, considering the land as an ecosystem, this is a very concerning thing. And therefore, we need to put our best effort to restore the land as well as to minimize this degradation. We have certain programs, so you can mention these programs also. For example, the UNCCD's this land degradation neutrality campaign, as well as India's this efforts also you can highlight in here. Okay, so that is it about the second question. You can also mention this SDG, that is SDG of 15, which talks about land degradation neutrality. In the conclusion, you can also mention that this one, SDG of 15 also highlights about the land degradation neutrality. It is also essential for ensuring the food security as well. Okay, with this you can end the question. Next question is, compare the Lu, Chinook and Fohn winds with respect to their reasons of prevalence, nature and climatic impacts. Okay, now see here, one by one we will be discussing. So first let me discuss, this is about the first, see here, these are local winds, right? Now what is the local winds? Local winds are those winds which has the local impacts, and their impacts are also limited in some certain specific area, right? They can be warm, they can be cold, but essentially with their definition they will impact the smaller areas, right? Now see here, with this local winds definition you can start your question. For example, local winds are the winds which are found in a small regional area, a small area, and their impacts are also local in nature. They will not change this global patterns, right? Only local weather patterns can be impacted by them. So for example, we are starting with, let's say, this is Chinook. Now Chinook, if you see, this is the, here it is, see here. This is here the Rockies we have in this area. From here, let's say if I make this, see, this is the winds. Okay, these are the winds. Now if I make this Rockies here, so for example these are the Rockies, here it is, I'm talking about western side, this is the eastern side, right? So let's say this is the western side, here it is the eastern side. I am talking about somewhere in winters, right? Winters or early spring. In this area, the very cold region it is, that is here, I'm talking about this area, right? That is east side of the Rockies, very cold area it is. It is the winter months, almost it is frozen, which is not suitable for grazing as well as for the agriculture right now, because for the grazing also melting should occur. Okay, Now, from this side here, some warm winds from the Pacific region, they will rise over this Rockies. This is Rockies. When this warm and moist winds, they will rise because of, let's say, cooling and condensation, they can cause the good amount of rainfall here, right? So this is how they will cause rainfall in which side? Mostly in this windward western slope of the Rockies. However, when they come to the second side, the other side here, these winds, they have lost their most of the moisture. Therefore, they have less moisture. And also because of this adiabatic compression, means the adiabatic compression, if you understand, whenever the air will go down, the compression will happen. And adiabatically, because the density of the air is increasing here, less is the area for the air which is descending. So descending air will experience rise in temperature. Now what happens is, when there is rise in temperature, now it has become warmer. Will it lead to rainfall here? Answer is no. Why? Because most of the moisture has been dissipated in the other side. As well as when temperature of the air increases, please remember, whenever the temperature of the air increases, it will lead to high humidity capacity for that air. What is high humidity capacity? Means it will gain the strength to hold its moisture, right? Which will not cause rainfall. Now, because of this reason, here you will not see rainfall and the air will become warmer this side. Okay. When this warmer air comes in contact with this snow, then this snow will start melting. And therefore, it is also known as snow eating, snow eater. Means these winds of Chinook are also referred as snow eater, as they result in defreezing of this area or melting of the ice in this area. Therefore, it is known as a snow eater. Now, with this melting, it is now very much possible, that is, you can do something agricultural regions wise, you can do something like grazing, and therefore it is very important for this area. Now see here, first their region. So what is this region? You will be explaining. This is the Rockies, the eastern side of the Rockies it is, right? This is the eastern side. Their prevalence you have explained. The second is its nature. Now what is its nature? Its nature is it is slightly warmer, and this slight warmer wind is more than sufficient to cause melting here. Okay. Then is it orographic wind which is coming from the upper slopes of the mountain? Yes, it is the orographic, right? So its nature is it is slightly warmer, not very much warmer, slightly warmer. It is coming from the height. So the orographic region it is in which it is occurring, and it is coming from the height. Okay. And in this climatic impacts, you will be discussing that it is causing melting of this area's snow, and therefore it is also important for causing this melting as well as making this area suitable for grazing and agriculture. This is the role of the Chinook. The similar, same to same, means everything is same except the area, right? So now see here, the second wind, that is, I'm going to explain the phone. So phone, if I explain, phone. So where it is found? If this is the Europe, see here. So in this Europe, here we have Alps, right? Alps. In the same way from Mediterranean, see here, this is the southern slope. This is the northern slope of the Alps. Now I'm taking southern and northern slopes of this Alps. Okay. Now let's say this is the Alps. From southern slope, that is Mediterranean side, I am talking about the other slope, that is northern slope. The same way, the warm air and the moist air will rise here. And this warm and moist air, when it rises, it causes the same way rainfall in this area. After coming to the other side, however, this becomes, let's say, less moist, and it will become warmer also. So this side, this warmer winds, this warmer local wind, the same task is performed by this also. That is, it will also cause snow melting here in the which side? Northern side of the Alps. Okay. Again, it will make the area suitable for again agriculture, and also it is suitable for now for extended seasons of grazing. Okay. Now see here, what is the common point in between the two? See here, Phone and the Chinook, they both are causing melting of the snow here. Okay, one in the North America, the second in the Europe. They both are orographic in nature. They both are causing rainfall in one side, okay, and melting in the other side. They both are warmer also. So more or less they are similar. However, even if they are slightly warmer, they cause a lot of this psychological distress in the people's behavior, right? So this fawn distress or the fawn's psychological distress is something also which is very commonly known in the Europe region, right? So this is the region, say here, about the fawn, which is the region of their prevalence. It is, you have explained with this diagram, you can also make, that is, it is the Europe. Which part of the Europe? Northern slope of the Europe. Is it warmer? Yes, it is warmer. Is it orographic in nature? Yes, orographic means it is coming from the mountain area, right? Orography means mountain. So it is orographic in nature, coming down from the mountain, slightly warmer, making the area suitable for agriculture as well as grazing, increasing the temperature slightly, making the conditions slightly more comfortable, right? So this is the role of the what? It is the role of fawn. Now, if we compare the third and the last one, see here we have discussed this two. The third one is Lu. Now, what is Lu? If we discuss the Lu, see here now. In the same way, Lu, you will explain. The Lu is something which is formed where? In case of India, see here, in case of India, the Lu will be found in this area especially. That is very hot area of Rajasthan, then parts of UP and Haryana especially. However, nowadays this Lu is extending beyond this region. In many other areas up to Andhra Pradesh also the impact of Lu has been felt. So however, these three areas are more impacted by this Lu, right? So Lu is nothing but what? Lu is a very hot wind. So if we compare this Lu with the other, so region of prevalence, where it is prevailing? So it is prevailing in India, and where exactly? These regions, number one. Number two, it is also dust laden. Sometime it will come with dust. Okay? It is dust laden. It is extremely dry. It can increase the temperature of other areas wherever it will reach, right? So it will increase the temperature of the areas wherever it will reach. It also create a lot of what? Heat wave related phenomena. Heat waves phenomenon. It can also result in death of the people because of extreme temperatures which are caused by this Lu. Is it orographic in nature or found at the height? Answer is no. It is nothing but the thermal difference which is causing this Lu to blow. So is it orographic? No. It is nothing but near the surface, lower level of the near lower levels, near the ground, you can write rather near the ground this is found. Okay, so now how it is different from the other two winds? Now you can see clearly other two were simply warmer, but this is very hot. Other two were not having that much of the dust content. Here it can be dust laden. The other two were in, one was in the North America, the second one was in the Europe. But this is in where? This is in India, especially the states that is Rajasthan, UP and Haryana. There it is very commonly found. Then these were helpful for the agriculture. Okay? They were impacting the weather in that way. Here this will increase the heat wave incident. Also it will result into what? The soil moisture loss. It will also cause a lot of death of the people. Okay, so atmospherically, if you will consider, or the weather related patterns which can be introduced by this heat wave, so weather will become extreme dry, the extreme rate of evaporation can be there, and soil degradation can also happen under the Lu. This is nothing but we have discussed all three winds with this all diagrams you can explain, you can also compare them. Okay, done. And in the last, you can say simply the local winds, however, they are local in terms of their area, in terms of where they are found, but their impacts can be very, let's say, impactful when it is considered weather, local weather patterns, the socio-ecological conditions, okay, etc. So they are very important, okay, and they were highly in news. Why? Because of this Californian fires and the Santa Ana local winds, right? So we were expecting a question on the local winds, right? So this is how they are important. Very occasionally, however, this local winds that we have discussed, especially this Lu, can cause this, let's say, spreading of the forest fire if it is the fire. So it can be spreaded. Also, sometimes we have seen phone can also do the same task. However, it is very uncommon. Okay, phone in the northern side of the slope, is it slightly warmer? Yes, it is. Therefore, sometimes it can also cause fire, but not very commonly. Okay. The next question is again of 10 marks. Discuss the aim and goal of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity. Mention India's commitment and initiatives to achieve the goals and targets of this framework, giving suitable examples. Now, see here. In this simply, what is Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework? So you can simply introduce that it was under COP of 15, under this Convention on Biodiversity. And this Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework was actually signed, or let's say was unfolded. In this Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, if you understand, see here, I'm just giving you some background. In CBD, we have, means Convention on Biodiversity, we have three things. One is conservation of the biodiversity. Second is sustainable use of biodiversity. And the third is fair and equitable distribution of what? The benefits, right? In the same way, the same three goals are there. Now see here, if you see the, see here, sustainable use, same. Fair and equitable benefit sharing, same. And here nothing but it is what? The halt of the biodiversity loss is nothing but what? Conservation of biodiversity. So these are the three same to same goals as the CBD had. Now, before this Kunming Biodiversity Framework, there were HE biodiversity targets, HEBD targets, biodiversity targets. This HE biodiversity targets, they were largely failed. And why they failed? It was primarily because of lack of funding. Because of lack of funds and the lack of this capacity building initiative, these HE targets were largely failed. Example of failed targets. Now, after realizing this, HE biodiversity got failed because of this lack of funds phenomena. Therefore, here implementation has been added as a fourth goal, important goal. And for this implementation, all sort of things such as financial, such as capacity building, they all have been added in this pillar of implementation. The first is the aim and the goal. So these goals, that is 4 goals, they are to be achieved by 2050. So these are the 4 goals of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework. However, if we consider aims, so what are the aims of this, let's say, framework convention? So in this targets, that is under the this Kunming, total there are 23 targets. If you see this targets, the major targets say something about the aim. So what is aim? So first aim is there should be no human-led extinction of the species. Human-led extinctions are to be halted. Extinctions are to be halted. The second is the, of course, conservation of the biodiversity. Conservation. And for this conservation, it has a plan. What is this plan? 30 into 30 strategy. What is this 30 into 30 strategy? Very important strategy. 30% of all ecosystems. Okay? All means all. Marine, aquatic, terrestrial, any of the ecosystem. 13% must be protected and 30% must be protected, not 13. 30% must be protected and 30% of the degraded ecosystems must be restored. That is the 30 into 30 strategy. So human-led extinctions to be halted. 30 into 30 strategy means the biodiversity is to be conserved. 30% of the areas that is not covered under any, let's say, legal framework, they need to be covered. At least 30% of such ecosystems must be protected legally, and 30% of the ecosystems must be, let's say, 30% of the ecosystem must be, therefore, we can say, brought to the reinforced under the, let's say, initiatives which are caused by, let's say, the initiatives which are nothing but by the countries. थोड़ा सा cut कर देना यार, ये मैं repeat कर रहा हूँ बार बार, ठीक है? I am highlighting. So again I'm repeating. ये पीछे 2 सेकंड का कर देना. So what is the aim here? 30% of the ecosystems are to be conserved, all ecosystems, and 30% of all ecosystems which are degraded, they need to be brought out of this degradation. Okay. Then some other aims, let's say the benefit sharing mechanism, that is fair and equitable benefit sharing mechanism should be there. And also for the implementation here, the external mention of $700 billion has also been highlighted. The impact of climate change, the impact of pollution, impact of climate change, impact of pollution, okay, all they have been mentioned, and this impacts are to be minimized according to this, the Kunming Biodiversity Framework Fund. So these are the major aims of this, let's say, framework. Now, NBSAP. What is NBSAP? That is India submitted its NBSAP in 2024. That is National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan. In this Kunming Montreal Framework, every country was supposed to provide this NBSAP. India submitted its NBSAP in the Cali meet under COP, under this CBD. Here, India has given a lot of things. Okay? Mainly, if we highlight it, India said that we are annually expending around 81,000 crore rupees on the biodiversity conservation. That is something we highlighted. Then India also highlighted that to understand the species extinction and their behavior, we are creating our own national red list. The one red list which is created by IUCN, that is global. To understand this region-specific, the threats to various species, extinction-related data of the various species, India highlighted we are creating our own national red list for a period of 2025 to 30. It will come in operation. For this 5 years, we will create this red list. Then we also highlighted here that we are restoring biodiversity and the ecosystem, right, at an unprecedented scale. We have also highlighted that the green cover of India has increased. It is not only the India's State of Forest report is saying, but also Food and Agricultural Organization also reported the same, that India's green cover has increased. So India highlighted how we are increasing this green cover. A lot of initiatives were also highlighted. Our mangrove related conservation and all these things were highlighted. Then India also highlighted not only this, we are also working on capacity building and awareness in the people. We also highlighted our Biodiversity Amendment Act, where India has also focused on the benefit sharing mechanism, as it is one of the aim. If you see, the one of this goal is also the fair and equitable benefit sharing. So India has also highlighted that in our Biodiversity Amendment Act, we have also ensured that this benefits accrued by the use of biodiversity, they should be distributed fairly and equitably. And we have also given some data and figures also, right? So in this way, India has highlighted a lot of things. India said this campaign was given the name, that is whole of government and whole of society approach. It is under NBSAP. India highlighted its approach, whole of the government as well as whole of the society. They all are engaged together in order to conserve this biodiversity. India also highlighted that this conservation of the biodiversity is not the, let's say, national agenda, but also it is now integrated to our Panchayati Raj and the local governance also. It was also highlighted under NBSAP that the conservation of this species has become now from local to national, right? So this is, we have also mentioned the efforts of conservation are going to be linked with the local governance as well, right? So in that way, we have discussed the question. That is it. Next and the last question of the environment is, what are the challenges of the solid waste management in India, right? So this is the first thing, that is challenges we will discuss. The second is discuss the salient features of the governmental policy framework on solid waste management, means what sort of frameworks we do have to deal with, and highlight the success and failure cases of Delhi and Indore, right? It is of 15 marks. 3 are the dimensions in this question to be discussed. The first one, that you can always start such questions related to this waste and all with some data. So in this, you can use some data. For example, India generates 160 to 170,000 tons of the solid waste in a day. It is the CPCB's data, right? This is the data of CPCB. And there is one more report, that is what a waste report. What a waste report. This is released by the World Bank. And this report says, in case of Asia, this solid waste generation is going to be doubled by the year of 2050. So solid waste is going to be doubled by 2050. This has been mentioned by this report of World Bank also, right? So one thing is you have mentioned here, and the second thing is you have also mentioned that according to the World Bank, if we go, this data, this generation is going to be double, right? So this problems, if we do have, if they are not eradicated well, so the problems are also going to be double. Yes or no? Yes. Now, what are the very common issues which are, let's say, experienced by us? So if you understand, if you may have, let's say, if you have seen this cities, especially in case of India, then you may have experienced these problems are very common. The first problem starts from the collection itself. When at the collection center, if you see, all the waste is dumped together without segregation. So segregation is a very major problem. The second problem then starts is its transportation is also something which is dealt by informal people. They are not very well aware. The transportation related issues where this, let's say, the waste is transported, it is not properly GPS enabled vehicles. They are informal people linked to this kabadi walas and rag pickers. These vehicles themselves are very damaged. They themselves are very kind of destroyed. Whenever the transportation of the waste happens, often this will lead to spill over of the waste. Okay? And very unhygienic in manner it happens. So many problems are there. Segregation is the issue. Processing is also the issue. It is roughly around 80 to 82% of the solid waste that we generate, India generate, it is processed. The rest of the 18%, where it goes? It goes often in the landfills. It is often found in here and there areas, right? Segregation is the problem. Processing is the problem. Only 82% is being, let's say, processed. Then the issue is legacy waste. What is the legacy waste? Means created in so many years, and now we are supposed to handle them, right? So that is legacy waste. Informal sector is there mostly and largely, so they are not very much skilled, they are not very much trained. Also, they are dealing with this hazardous waste without having any social security, right? So that is also the problem. Then financial problem. For example, this task of the solid waste management, it is of the local bodies, and the local bodies already have, let's say, lack of funds with them. They do not also have proper manpower. So this is also the problem. In fact, the Bombay Municipal Corporation, one of the richest corporation, has also introduced this fine mechanism so that they can finance this solid waste mechanism there, right? So this is the problem related to capacity, finances. So these all are the very common problem which are experienced in the solid waste management sector of India. Now, when it comes to what are the policies that we do have, means our government has. So the very first one is Solid Waste Management Rules of 2016. In this waste management rules, the segregation has been highlighted, that the segregation is something that is to be done at the door, means collection at the collection site. Now, in this segregation, after then it is also here we have waste to energy mechanism also there. Okay? There is also the EPR mechanism, extended producers responsibility, the bulk generators, the hotels, the restaurants, the public gathering where the waste is created. Then this hotels and the, let's say, public gathering sites cannot say it is not our responsibility to manage this solid waste. Their responsibility it is. That is the extended producers responsibility mechanism has been introduced in this one. Also, the sport fine mechanism was also there. Sport fine means if you are littering in the open streets, then it can result into sport fine mechanism. Also, it talked about formalization of the informal people, right? However, after a lot of years, we have seen nothing much of the results were coming. We updated these sites, these rules again and again, time and again. In 2026, we have added some categories of this segregation. So this waste is to be segregated now in the 4 categories. Then we have also inserted the environmental compensation. For example, if there is pollution which is going on, solid waste management is not proper, then CPCB can also, with polluter pay principle, can can fine this environmental compensation to the people, right? So this is something, the polluter pay principle. Then online monitoring has been added. Then for the waste management, the land is to be allocated, and this land allocation has also become faster under the new rules. The another so many initiatives are there. The primarily we have this one, but so many other initiative we do have. For example, polluter pay principle, by which CBCB has enabled itself to levy some fine and all. Then we have National Bioenergy Program, where after segregation, the material which you have segregated, you can create some energy out of that. For example, organic matter coming from the kitchen waste, it can go into this bioenergy sector, right? So we have this program, Swachh Bharat Mission 2.0, where India has envisaged that our cities must be this dump site free. We have also launched this mission, Zero Dump Site Mission, under the SBM, that is Swachh Bharat Mission, which is nothing but itself, it is with name, it is clear, Zero Dump Site Mission. No dump site should be there. Okay. These all are the missions. Along with that, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development has also launched this material recovery facilities. So for example, you have segregated the waste, then after segregation, these plants can also segregate some of the important material out of this waste, right? These all are the initiatives which we do have. The last part of the question says, see here, the 2 dimensions we have discussed, that is discuss the salient features of the government policy framework we have discussed. Now the two case study, one is of the Delhi, second is of the Indore. What is the, let's say here, what is we are supposed to discuss? For example, in case of Delhi and in case of Indore, what is the difference? See here, this is Delhi and this is Indore. The first thing is, see here, Delhi has very advanced plants compared to Indore. Advanced plants and the technology treatment facility it has. But still, if you see, even after this advanced plants, the landfill sites are there in Delhi. There are landfills, right, in the Delhi. Whereas Indore has almost no landfills, right? So no landfills almost. So we can conclude with this, that is the processing is not 100% here. Okay. So the second point, processing is not 100%, because if it was 100%, they should not have landfills here in Delhi. Here it is 100% is the processing capacity. Then comes is collection and segregation. So collection and segregation. In segregation, still we have the issues in Delhi, and collection is also not GPS enabled. Vehicles are there. GPS enabled vehicles are not there. In case of this Indore, collection is proper, door to door, almost 100%, and also the transportation vehicles are GPS enabled. Because of this GPS enabled transportation vehicle, it is very easy to monitor them, so that they should not dump this waste that they have collected in between somewhere, right? So this is somewhere, it is more in the Indore. GPS monitoring is there, transportation is proper. And last but not the least, in case of Delhi, it is also the citizen apathy, which is the big issue. Means citizens themselves are not very well, let's say, participating. Whereas in case of Indore, the citizens are very aware and they are participating fully, right? So this is all the questions we have discussed. And the last you can highlight in the solid waste management. India, considering the World Bank's Waste 2.0 report, may experience a lot more difficulties if the waste creation is going to be doubled by 2050. Therefore, we need to work on all these problems that we have highlighted. Okay, giving the example, it is also possible giving the example of Indore as a case study. Okay.
So the first question that UPSC asked was tundra regions are ecologically fragile but economically important. So there are three keywords: tundra, ecologically fragile, economically important, and then they are saying it to examine the statement. So now it's very simple. Tundra becomes my intro. This becomes my body, part 1. This becomes my body, part 2. Examine becomes my body, part 3. That is, here I have to show the tension between fragility and economics. Okay, and the conclusion here simply is way forward. That is, here I can talk about Arctic Council. Here I can talk about Svalbard Treaty 1920. So these are the aspects. This is how the body is going to be. So if you have covered, even if you have written 1 something, you are going to get marks. Remember, this is an important aspect because the question here is examine. So just mere writing this and moving to conclusion will not justify the directive of the question. And that too, it is saying critically. Because of this aspect, this becomes very important. Okay. So let us see. Why it is saying examine critically? You see, first we are introducing, then we are saying that the fragility, then we are saying that yes, despite the fragility, there is so much of economic importance. Then we are talking about the economic importance. Then the word critically examine, it means that, okay, it is economically important, but has the anthropogenic activities over the years has caused any disturbance in the fragility? This is what the question is demanding from you. Okay. So this is what we will try to now answer. So in the introduction, in the tundra, right? Tundra is a biome. It is located in 3, we can find them in along the Arctic, along the Alpine zone, and also along the Antarctica zone. Okay. They are mostly the tundra, the biome, they are mostly, the characteristics features are permafrost, that is severe cold, and abundance of lichens plus mosses plus sedges plus we can talk about shrubs. Only sparsely you will find trees here. Okay, trees are found very sparsely here and intermittently. So once we have defined this, though it is a 10 marker question, but in brief, I must have shown what is the tundra region. Okay. Remember, UPSC does not award you for painting. It only awards for the labeling. So now if I have to show the tundra region, this is the tundra region, the Nunavut region, the Greenland zone, the outer boundary, the Scandinavian zone, this side, the Siberian Alaska, okay, Alaska, Siberia, and this portion of Canada, Antarctica. Somewhere here in the Himalayan you can find, here you can find, and here also. These which I have marked, these are alpine zones. These are alpine. Okay. So now here I could have written, I should have marked it here. That is, here I can talk about Alaska. This is the Nunavut region of Canada. Nunavut region. This is Greenland, Scandinavia, Siberia. This is how is the tundra region. Once we have talked about this, we talk about the ecological fragility. Here you see the question here has been mostly asked because of the so-called the climate change. Okay. So now if I have to talk about ecological fragility, four things comes to my mind. First, can I say the ecological is the first is permafrost dependence. Once the permafrost dependence we say, so you see the what is permafrost dependence? In the permafrost dependence, the lower layers are always, the subsurface layer is always frozen. This is frozen. Okay. So now you see the structural stability and of this region depends upon this zone. So tomorrow, because of climate change, if this melts, now the structural stability of the zone can become vulnerable, and this itself can lead to solifluction. It can lead to land subsidence. It can lead to, okay, sinkholes. So this is how we can talk about. First is permafrost dependence. Second, what we are saying here is short growing season. In the short growing season, you see, the growing season here only lasts up to 50 to 60 days. So this means the vegetation has only a limited period to do photosynthesis. Within this period, they will have to do photosynthesis. They will have to flower. Okay, every aspect has to be done within this. So any anthropogenic activity that disrupts the vegetation during this zone, this means that now they will not have enough time. So here remember the regenerative capacity. The regenerative capacity is very limited. Due to why it is limited? Short temporal period is available. Short temporal period is available. So pehla hai ki I have talked about the soil. Then I have talked about the vegetation. What next can I talk? Next I can talk about here is the biodiversity. Here you see, if you remember, I hope you all remember the name in, okay, that the ecosystem stability principle. Okay. Ecosystem stability principle. Here you see what it is trying to say. It tries to say that the food chain here is very short. That is vegetation. That is vegetation. I can say here is lichens, mosses. Okay. Or I can talk about here is sedges. These sedges are grazed by reindeers, and reindeers are eaten by polar bears. Okay. So now you see any disruption in the food chain can have a cascading effect on the ecosystem stability of the tundra region. So once we have talked about these three aspects, the most important aspect that we will talk about now is the aspect that the question is demanding. That is, it is the reservoir of CO2. Reservoir of CO2 means 1700 billion tons of CO2 is stored there. Okay, that is double what is available in the present atmosphere. So tomorrow, if because of climate change, the permafrost thaws, the thawing and the melting of the subsurface zones will lead to release of CO2 plus methane gas. This in itself will lead to what we say as positive feedback mechanism. Positive feedback mechanism, which will accelerate the process of climate change. So now we are beginning to the second part of the question. First part we have discussed. Okay. So now moving to the second part. In the second part of the question is economically important. So if we see economic importance, first we see here is hydrocarbons. So if you see, as per the US Geological Survey estimate 2022, okay, it has close to undiscovered 10% oil of the world and close to 30% of the natural gas. Okay. Second, if you see, second what we talk about here is it has minerals. Minerals means here they have nickel, they have diamond, they have rare earth minerals. Okay. Then next what we see here is the third most important economic importance here is connectivity. Now because of Arctic amplification, the Arctic glaciers are melting at a very faster pace. So as a result, what is happening? More and more ports are going to get developed. As a result, the trade routes or the connectivity between Asia and Europe is now going to decline drastically as compared to the present Suez route. Okay. Next, what we talk about here is the subsistence activities. In the subsistence activities, we talk about reindeer herding. Reindeer herding, you see, there is a tribe which is known as Tenet. They do reindeer herding in the Siberian zone of Russia. Okay. And finally, what we can talk about here is tourism. Okay. Tourism, if you see the Nunavut region of China, Canada, or the Svalbard zone. So they earn important foreign exchanges. So now this is how we are supposed to write these 5 pillars in one line. What is the most important aspect of the economic importance? Once we have talked the economic importance, now we will examine critically. Then we are showing the ecological and economic tension. The ecological and economic tension arises. So now this is where we have to substantiate. Remember, this without substantiation will not yield more marks. So here can I say, here is because of infrastructural development. Now what is happening? Incidences of land subsidence is taking place. structural instability is arising. This can be witnessed by the land subsidence witnessed in Finland and the Alaskan zone. Next, what we can talk about here is pollution. If you remember, in the year 2020, there was an incident, in the Norilsk zone, where close to 21,000 tons of diesel was discharged in the Ambarnaya river. So this is another important issue which is hampering there. And finally, what is happening? Destruction of local vegetation and displacement of tribes. And finally, we can talk about here is fourth is biodiversity loss. That is the habitat of polar bears are declining drastically. And as a result, human-animal conflict between the polar bears and the tundra living tribe ethnic groups have increased. So now once I have commanded all three demands, now I will move to conclusion. So in conclusion, I can talk about three things. One, I can say that the monitoring under Arctic Council needs to be strengthened. From here we can say that the monitoring. Then I can talk about is that the Paris Agreement, the INDCs under Paris Agreement, this needs to be fulfilled very quickly so as to reduce the global warming. And third, I can give a good case study. If you see, this is Alaska. They have created a trans-Alaskan pipeline. This is a trans-Alaskan pipeline. This trans-Alaskan pipeline, now what they have done, they have ensured the tundra standards in construction. Tundra standards means they have deployed thermosiphons plus elevated structures to ensure that these lands, the subsidence of the land in the times of thawing of permafrost frost zones does not lead to damaging of the infrastructures. So there was enough content to write. The only question to score marks was how smartly you would have covered the different bullets and how specific you would have been in substantiating those arguments. So now moving to the next question. That is, water resources are both an asset and a conflict in South Asia. Examine. The statement giving examples. So now we will pick up, water resources. So we can say that South Asia has three major transnational rivers. That is Indus, Ganga, Brahmaputra, that feeds close to 2 billion people. Mostly how? 1.45 billion people India plus Pakistan plus China plus Bangladesh. So this is how I could have started here, the introduction. Once I have written this, then I could have written in the introduction itself, maybe, that the conflicts have increased because the South Asia region is witnessing water stress scenario. Water stress scenario is when UNDP says that water availability per capita falls below 1700 meter cube per person per year. And if you see India itself, for India, the water has fallen close to 1486 meter cube per person. So now in South Asia, India itself holds a large territory that is close to 1.42 billion people itself is facing situation of water stress, and thus the conflict have arose. Plus, okay. So now if you see, we talk about how it is an asset. If you see asset, remember the first thing you talk about here is irrigation and food security. So here I will give example. I can give example of Pakistan. That Pakistan, Indus alone accounts for 80% of the irrigation, for 80% of the cultivable area. And this alone, Indus alone accounts for 90% of the food production of Pakistan. Or here you could have just given a simple data that 60% of the complete irrigation comes from these three major rivers. Next, I can talk about here is hydropower and energy security. We know if you talk about Nepal, Nepal has numerous dams. One such important is Arun 3. If you talk about Bhutan, Bhutan has Chuka. Bhutan has Chuka plus Tala. And if you have to see India, from India, you have numerous examples. That is Tehri Dam, okay, Baglihar Dam, Kishan Ganga Dam, Ratle Dam, Bhakra Nangal Dam, Pong Dam, Chamera Dam. Numerous such dams you can write. Third, what we can say here is water resources are both an asset. How water resources is going to be an asset? Can I say this plus this? Next is drinking water. So when I say drinking water, it means because of this, numerous urban areas have flourished. If you see, I can give example from India, Kanpur, Delhi, Patna. Okay, from Pakistan, you can give one example is Sindh. Next, I can talk about here is navigation and connectivity. You see, this question was very easy. Among all the 5 questions that I will discuss, this was the most easiest question to score. Everybody knows water say irrigation, water say energy, water say drinking water, water say this. Here I can talk about inland navigation, inland waterways, 1 on Ganga and 2 on Brahmaputra. Plus I can talk about India, Bangladesh, protocol route. Okay, one more I could have added here is that ecology. Ecology means I can talk about here that the Brahmaputra and the Ganges forms the world's largest delta, that is the Sundarban Delta. And Sundarban alone is enriched the largest acreage of mangrove on the planet. So yes, this itself is an asset for the South Asian nation. However, it is a source of conflict. So if it is a source of conflict, what is the source of conflict? How to write the source of conflict? Source of conflict first here is water sharing. Water sharing. Here I can talk about how Indus Water Treaty itself has been put in abeyance since Pahalgam attack. Okay. Next, I can talk about how the Teesta non-finalization of Teesta waters have acted as bilateral irritant between India and Bangladesh. Okay, source of conflict. Next, we can talk about here is the sharing of hydrological data. Sharing of hydrological data. Okay, today itself you would have seen that how the lack of sharing of data between China and Nepal led to the cascading flash flood in one of the districts of Nepal and the flooding of Dhote Koshi. Okay, so here we can talk about lack of data on Brahmaputra between India and China. Okay, next, if you see water as a strategic tool. So here you see China is constructing the world's largest dam on Yarlung Sangpo. It is 3 times larger than the Three Gorges Dam, and this is close to 60,000 megawatt it is going to produce. Okay, so this is going to be a very deadly, this can be a very deadly strategic lever for India. And next I can talk about here is how climate change is going to be a multiplier. As a multiplier. So here I can talk about how you see Ganga Water Treaty. Now this was signed in the year 1996, which is also called as Ganga Accord. And now the renewal date is going to arrive in the month of December. So now Bangladesh wants a larger share from the Ganga. But we have seen that how the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayan zones have already reduced the outflow in the Ganga water. So the hydrological regime of the Ganga have declined sharply, which is very visible given the constriction of the Ganga. So now you see the Bihar government is already in arms against the giving up of larger share of water to Bangladesh under the renewal of the Ganga Accord in the month of December. So basically this is how I have, you see, you were supposed to talk about Indus, you were supposed to talk about Teesta, Ganga Water Treaty, and you were supposed to talk about this China's dam. So this is how you were supposed to substantiate your answer. So once we have written this, so now here you see, I will give way forward. What we need to do. In the way forward, you see, first I can say that we can implement SARC or beamstick based monitoring. Regional monitoring. Second, we can say here is that real-time basis sharing of hydrological data. Okay, and third, here you see what we can say here is climate resilient flow sharing formula. You were supposed to bring climate here. you were supposed to bring sark and beamstick in your conclusion. Okay, this is how you were supposed to. Now basically what I'm trying to say here is strengthening the present institutions rather than creating new ones. Okay, and this is very important, real-time sharing of hydrological data. This is what India and China is missing, especially on Bangladesh. This puts Northeast India on a vulnerable side. Okay, so moving ahead to the next question. Analyze the role of satellite-based technologies in achieving climate-smart agriculture. So analyze satellite, climate-smart agriculture, and food security. Okay. So now these are the 4 aims. So I can simply say in satellite-based technologies have become the backbone. This has become the backbone for ensuring the or achieving climate smart agriculture. So basically what I'm trying to speak here is that this is, if I would have written this intro, then this intro is nothing but restatement of the question itself. So basically what I could have written, like you see now. Now the introduction in exam, I should know that as per FAO, what are the 3 pillars of climate smart agriculture? And as per FAO, what are the 4 pillars of food security? So now if I have to create a beautiful introduction, this is how I am going to use these 3 pillars and 4 pillars. So now what I should have written is that satellite-based technologies have played a critical role in achieving the 3 pillars of climate smart agriculture, FAO. So now I would have written like this. Once I have done this, now I will deploy a mechanism. What I will write here first, I am suppose is sustainable increase in yield. Second I am talking about here is adaptation and resilience. That is resilience against droughts, floods, heat waves. Third I am talking about here is reduction in greenhouse gases. Why? Now we are planning this, we are deploying to achieve these 3 pillars. Based on these 3 pillars, now what we are going to achieve? We are going to achieve affordability. We are going to achieve availability. We are going to achieve accessibility. And we are going to achieve food utilization. So now this is how I could have introduced my intro, and I could have let the examiner know what exactly these keywords are meaning to us. Okay. Once we have done with this, now we will move to the body. So role of satellite-based technologies. Here you see, in the role of satellite-based technologies, here now you have to be smart. Here, this has to be written under 4 pillars. 15 marker hai, stretch karo thoda. Ki now what we will see ki how satellite has been deployed in understanding all the 4 pillars. One such is pre-sowing. Okay, we will see what is pre-sowing. Pre-sowing means before, like understanding the soil moisture, understanding the groundwater availability. So we can also call it planning stage. Once we have sown, now the next here should be the maturation stage, or what we also say here is crop growth. Crop growth plus maturation stage. Once we have seen crop growth, so now can I say कि फसल लगाने से पहले का स्टेज हो गया, फसल लग गई, अब फसल बड़ी होते जा रही है, तो अब फसल काटने का वक्त आएगा. तो फसल काटने से पहले फसल कहीं खराब नहीं हो जाए, ये भी एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट मैकेनिज्म है हमारा कि फसल खराब नहीं हो जाए. So that is for what we do here is what we say is risk mitigation stage. Risk mitigation plus early warning system stage. And finally here is post harvest plus market linkage. Plus market linkage. So you see, agriculture is one of the most easiest topic to write. If your concept in agriculture is as well developed as a farmer, because India is an agrarian economy, you have to have a huge command over this. So in pre-sowing and planning stage, can I say, first important here is soil moisture. I must understand the presence of soil moisture. So for soil moisture, you see, there is ISRO's Bhuvan portal. Now, if I have to give example, this itself is utilized by Andhra Pradesh, Ryutu Bharosa Kendra. Okay. So now this Ryutu Bharosa Kendra, it provides input to the farmers regarding the availability of soil moisture. Based on this, the farmers usage or decides the crops to be sown. Next, I can talk about here is groundwater availability. Groundwater availability. So here I can say ki how Jal Shakti Abhiyan plus Atal Bhujal Yojana, both of them are deploying satellite-based technologies to understand the availability of groundwater. So based on this, I could have discussed the pre-sowing or the planning stage. So once I have written here only, this is a bullet, under this 1 bullet, under this 2 bullet. Okay. So once we have understood this, now we will move to the second stage. In the second stage, you see, it is talking about crop growth and maturation stage. Okay. So in the crop growth, can I say कि here I need to know one pillar first is precision agriculture. Okay. That here I have to provide water and fertilizer as per the need of the crops. Second, can I say, I need to understand the so-called what we call about here is pre-harvest yield. That is, I have to understand what is the yield of the crops. And I have to understand what is the acreage. In how much land area we have grown horticulture, how much land area we have grown cereals, So now this is ISRO's, they use ISRO's Chaman portal. Here we deploy ISRO's Chaman portal. Okay, and to understand the yield, here you see, there is a Fasal program of ISRO. Fasal program. And to understand the Fasal program, you have to understand normal vegetation difference, NVDI, normal vegetation difference index. Basically, it is this index through which we try to understand what is the present yield. And what do they deploy? They deploy multispectral imagery. Do you remember there's a question in GS3 Mission Drishti? In that very question, there is concept of multispectral imaging and SAR, synthetic aperture radar. So here they are deploying multispectral imagery. To understand the yield of the crops. So now here I have given 3 bullets. Once I have talked all this aspect, so now I am moving to the third. Third here is early warning system. That is risk mitigation. So here can I say, you see, first is Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. They deploy YES technology. In this YES technology, what do they do? They deploy satellite imagery to understand, okay, the already present acreage and the yield, so that when the time of compensation comes, there should be no corruption there. Okay. Then you see there is another NADAMS. NADAMS. That is National Agricultural Drought Assessment and Monitoring System. National Agricultural Drought Assessment and Monitoring System. This, what it does, it provides fortnightly basis warning regarding the incidences of droughts. Remember, droughts is a good question. Now, drought is, they have already asked desertification and degradation, Aeolian wala. Droughts बढ़िया से करके रखना है पेपर 1 में, not just from the perspective of disaster. What is drought? What are the different measures? So once we have given these two, so 2 bullets, 3 to 5 plus 2, 7. And in this post-harvest, you can talk about MSP. Okay, here you can talk about M-Kisan, E-Naam, okay, and everything here. So once we have talked all these aspects, since it is saying the question was analyze, now we have to talk about what are the challenges in the satellite. So first challenge here is coarse spatial resolution for small and marginal farmers. So here you see what exactly it means. The resolution that the satellite provides, it is only from 6 meter to up to 56 meter. So this is a greater scale. इतनी बड़ी एरिया का resolution देगा तुमको. But if you see a small and marginal farmer, their land lies only less than 1.02 hectares. So now the advisories are not very suitable for the small and marginal farmers. Okay, this is the most important. Second important here is cloud cover during monsoon. So basically what happens ki now here, presently the synthetic aperture radar, this has been underutilized. So now what is happening? We cannot penetrate the cloud cover. And thus the advisories sometimes are not very useful. Okay, we cannot penetrate the cloud cover. Next, you see, what is the another important aspect? Government has come up with various tools such as M-Kisan plus Suvidha portal. Despite these, only 50% of the farmers are converting the advisories into the actionable actions. Another major challenge. Okay. And finally, the fourth major challenge here is the lack of, lack of dense monitoring sensors at local level. Okay. So once we have seen the challenges, so now what is the solution? So what should be the solution? Here you see the solution. The solution lies in, first solution is that synthetic aperture radar should be integrated with NAVIC so that we can penetrate even the clouds. And thus there should be 24/7 advisory. Okay. Second, once we have seen this, second, what we are talking about here is the most important aspect is, though satellite based climate smart agriculture is important, but can I say another important here is adoption of climate smart methodologies. Climate smart methodologies. That is system of rice intensification, sustainable sugarcane intensification. Okay. Third here you see, third we can talk about here is issuing advisory in hyper local languages. That is, here I am targeting mostly the hilly zones, the tribal zones, the remote zones. For them also the advisory must be there. And finally, fourth I can talk about here is capacity building. Capacity building of the farmers by Kisan Suvidha Kendras. Kisan Suvidha Kendras. Here they must be taught how to use the advisories. Okay. And based on this, they can convert into actionable. And finally, here you can ultimately talk about how to streamline the government measures, that is the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. So basically, this is the question. This question was also very easy. Simply, you needed to understand agriculture more than the satellites. Satellites में simple Chaman portal, ISRO Fasal program. Okay. You should have talked about Bhuvan portal. You should have talked about INSAT, ResourceSat. बस नाम के लिए यूज हो रहा था. कंसेप्ट तुम्हारी एग्रीकल्चर की ही चेक हो रही है कि तुमको एग्रीकल्चर कितना डेप्थ में पता है. This also got tested in GS3. Okay. So remember, agriculture will always play a very critical role. Okay. Geography in Indian geography means that this is agriculture geography and industrial geography. Earlier they used to ask question on industries. Presently they have focused on infrastructure and agriculture. Agriculture mostly because climate change के कारण yield कम हो रहा है. Now this is a very good question. Okay. You see, if you read NCERT, you will understand that international trade is a component of Indian geography as well, or the world geography as well. So how to handle such type of questions? It is saying that the center of global trade is gradually shifting from the Atlantic region to the Indo-Pacific region. Examine this statement. So examine करना है. तो सबसे पहले इंट्रो लिखनी है. इंट्रो के बाद मुझे कुछ एविडेंस देना होगा कि यस how the trade is shifting from transatlantic to Indo-Pacific. Then I have to talk about ki yes, now what are the reasons I am examining? So I will give reasons. Then I will say ki despite reasons, what are the challenges? And then finally, what is the way forward? So this is the demand of the question. To be very frank, this is what they are trying to ask you कि examine करना है तो. So now let us begin the examine intro. I can write in the intro that the center of global trade has shifted from transatlantic to Indo-Pacific, as is evidence or as is seen as Indo-Pacific now holds 60% of the global GDP and 48% of the global trade. Okay, so this is my introduction. Okay, this introduction itself is now giving me the idea that yes, the data is showing that it is changing. Once I have shown this, I can show now I can give evidences. Ki how? One evidence I can show here is that Strait of Malacca alone 25% of the global trade. Next I can say, second I can say that the merchandise exports from China, India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, they have increased drastically. I can give examples here: textiles, apparels, footwears, leatherware. Okay. And finally, I can talk about here is, third is concentration of manufacturing. Concentration of manufacturing. You can talk about here is Make in India. Okay. Once I have given, but here I could have been more smarter. How I could have been more smarter? Like you see, the world knows that this zone alone has played a very critical role. Okay. So now we know that earlier the trade was mostly between here to here. This is the transatlantic trade. And this is the Strait of Gibraltar. Now what we are saying that the trade from here to them, trade from the trade zones now this zone has emerged as a major trading zone. This zone has emerged. Earlier, this was the zone. Now the greener zone has emerged. Okay, you could have given datas or any reasoning. So now once we have talked about this, let us see what are the reasons. Why? What exactly is changing here? Okay. So remember, first here is the reason here is deindustrialization of the West. Deindustrialization of the West plus manufacturing relocation in Asia. China plus one strategy, make in India of, okay, Bangladesh, Vietnam, all are emerging. Why there is deindustrialization in the West? Because you see disagglomeration economies have emerged. Congestion has there, pollution has increased, land rents have increased, labor prices have increased, environmental norms have become more stringent. So now capitalists, they always exploit the space. The moment they see that the norms have strengthened, in order to increase the surplus, they will shift their bases where they can save more money. Okay, so this is the first agent, deindustrialization of the West and manufacturing relocation. Second important aspect here is that rise in middle class. That this is what is driving the demand. So it is not just what we say that the supply is increasing, but the demand itself is increasing. Okay, so here you could have given one data that Vietnam export in the was this billion in the year 2010. This increased close to 370 billion in the year 2022. So yes, this is a perfect data I have given from Vietnam. Okay. Then you see rise in the middle class, demand has increased. Here you can give example of India plus China plus Bangladesh. Third reason here is, apart from merchandise trade, digital trade and services have also boomed. Digital trade and services have also boomed. I can talk about IT BP. This is India's export has reached $192 billion as per the NASSCOM. Okay. So yes, the digital trade and services, India itself has become a juggernaut. But let us write more. Now we are entering the more important reasons. First here is economic blocks, or I basically economic institutions. Economic institutions, here I am writing, here is economic institutions means, basically you talk about FTAs. RCEP, this is the world's largest economic grouping when it comes to in percentage terms. Okay, world's largest economic grouping. Then you can talk about here is Quad, Critical Mineral Initiative. And third, you can talk about US IPEF framework, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Once I have talked about this, then I will talk about fifth. In fifth, I can talk about here is now the role of connectivity. Role of infrastructure and connectivity has improved. Here you will talk about China's BRI. You will talk about India's Act East policy. You will talk about here is India Middle East Economic Corridor. So now these are the factors which are bringing trade more on this side. Next, we can talk about strategic sector. Strategic sector concentration. In this strategic sector concentration, here you can talk about semiconductors, Taiwan. You can talk about rare earth minerals, China. Okay. So this is how basically you are supposed to talk about all these reasons. But since it is asking exam in, let us see challenges. Here you see the challenges here are multifold. First important challenge is that the port's infrastructure still lacks in its capacity when it comes to loading, unloading time. So this is still very poor in terms of Western nations, ports infrastructure. Second, we can talk about here is geopolitical conflicts. Especially the South Asian zone, here you can talk about Strait of Hormuz crisis and South China Sea crisis. South China Sea crisis. Next, you can talk about Malacca dilemma. Over concentration or disproportionately relying on certain choke points itself now can make the complete trade more vulnerable in these zones. Okay. Then lack of inclusivity. There are only few nations which have larger share of pie of the growing trade, that is China, Vietnam, India. The small Pacific island states, they are yet lagging. Okay. And fifth here is rising climate change. So the infrastructures are, if they are not very resilient, okay, this will increase the logistics cost. So this is how are the challenges. Next we can talk about is the way forward. In the way forward, you see, basically you have to talk about first India. India should now integrate Act East policy plus Sagarmala plus Mahasagar. All these policies must be integrated. Then regional blocks must be strengthened, such as SAARC, BIMSTEC, and its integration with ASEAN should be a priority so as to make SAARC and BIMSTEC equally functional. And here the heart is Myanmar. And this is the reason why Myanmar is always boiling, one of the reasons. Because if Myanmar becomes developed, now SAARC and ASEAN, or the BIMSTEC and ASEAN, they can flourish like anything, even if we leave behind Pakistan. Okay. Third, you see another important institutions is that ports compliance or ports infrastructure must be developed on the lines of WTO norms. Okay, and this is how you can write more and more. You could write here is how Quad plus IPEF, they needs to be streamlined. How China needs to respect the sovereignty of the nations when it comes to Belt and Road Initiative. So bas, this is how this question was to be done. So this question, if you see, this is at the juncture of geography and international relations. Okay, international relations, economics and geography. Remember this question. Next. And this is another easy question. After water, this is the another easy question. Analyze the major drivers of human-induced land use changes in India and their geographical consequences. तो सबसे पहले analyze करना है human-induced land use changes. So now this is a very easy question. I can write first here is deforestation. Simple है deforestation. Here you could have given example. In India, they are asking Great Nicobar project. Or you can talk about Kane-Betwa link. Then second we talk about here is urbanization plus urban sprawl. How you see, if you talk about Delhi, Delhi has urbanized rapidly in the north and this portion. So now as a result, what is happening? More and more fertile agricultural land is coming under the urban sprawl zone. Next we talk about here is agricultural expansion. Agricultural expansion. This is here you can talk about jhum cultivation. Okay. Next you can talk about here is encroachment into grasslands. Fourth you can talk about is industries, industrialization. Okay, in the industrialization, we know as a result what has happened. Numerous areas there are SEZs. Okay, then there are coastal economic zones. Next we can talk about is mining and quarrying. Mining and quarrying. So these are the 5 topics under which you were supposed to discuss this answer. More and more, like here, one more I could have added here is infrastructure. Infrastructure. Infrastructure, you should have talked about linear projects, Char Dham project. You could talk about hydroelectricity project, Tehri Dam, Bhakra Nangal Dam. Okay, more and more. Then urbanization and urban sprawl, you can talk about here is that the emergence of major tier 2 and tier 3 cities which are on rise. Okay, as we know, as per Niti Aayog, 50% of the population by 2050 will be urbanized within India. Agricultural expansion, here you could easily talk about the moving away towards water intensive crops such as growth of rice and wheat in green revolution areas, growing of cotton and sugarcane in Vidarbha and Marathwada, growing of rice and sugarcane in Kaveri tract. Industrialization, here you could have talked about Bokaro, here you could have talked about Pune, Chennai, Manesar, Pitampura, Lucknow, Kanpur, okay, and mining and quarrying, Kudremukh mining of the Western Ghats, Aravali mining, Chota Nagpur mining, okay, and more similarly. I could have drawn a map of India, and I could have also depicted all the major drivers of these. So now once we have talked about all these, now the second was simple. What are the geographical challenges? So if you see geographical challenges, the first important geographical challenges is land degradation and desertification. Because land is losing its ecosystem services to provide the provisioning, regulating, supporting, and cultural services to humans. So this is one most important. Here you could have talked about the mining areas of Chota Nagpur Plateau, or the indiscriminate usage of fertilizers in the green revolution areas, or saline ingress because of greater extraction of groundwater in the coastal regions of India. Okay. Next, second, I can talk about the geographical challenges में saline ingress ही डाल दो. Last year GS I am using, GS3 content I am using here is. Next, I am talking about decline in carbon sequestration. That is because of deforestation. This is I can talk about here is. Next, I can talk about is growing water scarcity because of the growing of water intensive crops and indiscriminate extraction of groundwater. Okay. Next, I can talk about here is urban heat island effect. Urban heat island effect. Next, I can talk about here is pollution of atmosphere. that is greenhouse gases. And here so I can write bullet and bullet and bullets. Okay. Next, one important I am missing here is biodiversity loss. That is human animal conflict. Kerala, Assam. So again, this question was very easy question. More bullet, 6 bullets, 7 bullets, more and more bullets you could have created for writing the answer. Okay, with this, I would say that the human and economic geography plus Indian geography was easily doable. Okay, except that transatlantic to Pacific, it could have, if you would have understood to deploy economics and IR equally, you could have easily handled the paper. Okay, so with this we wind up the discussion. Thank you.